pair of gargantuan lightning swords flashed through the air, and several pillars of wind were instantly sliced in half before dissipating into gusts of fierce winds. At the same time, golden light flashed within some of the pillars of wind, and a series of giant vortexes, each of which was around an acre in size, appeared inside them. The pillars of wind shuddered as they were drawn into the golden vortexes that had arisen inside them, causing them to quickly disintegrate. In the face of the combined attacks from the pair of Grand Ascension stage beings, the fearsome natural phenomenon was dispelled in the blink of an eye. After emerging from the Galestorm, the Ing-Spirit Holy Ark quickly flew out of the canyon. During the rest of the journey, Han Li and the others didn't encounter any other noteworthy perils, and they finally arrived in the territory of the spirit race after around half a year. Han Li and the others stood at the front of the giant ark, looking on at the natural city wall in the distance that was formed by a series of connected undulating mountain ranges. Beyond this massive city wall, a gigantic mountain that was hundreds of thousands of feet tall and pierced directly into the clouds could be seen in the distance. Halfway up the mountain was a series of triangular pagodas that were spread virtually over the entire mountain. The vastly renowned spirit sky stronghold of the spirit race is just up ahead. As opposed to a stronghold, it's actually more accurate to call it a city. Its function is similar to that of Deep Heaven City in that it acts as a barrier against foreign invasions. However, where we've set up super formations to encompass the entire territory of our two races with the exception of Deep Heaven City, the outskirts of the spirit race's territory is mostly comprised of extremely treacherous landscapes that are very dangerous for armies to traverse, so they only have to worry about guarding a few strategic locations. In total, there are 7 of these strongholds in the spirit race, Mo Jianli explained. This stronghold is very well guarded, but if we want to pass around it, we should be able to do it with ease. Do you think we should do that or enter the city through more conventional means? Mo Jianli seemed to have already considered this in advance, and he immediately replied, "We didn't request an audience with the spirit monarch in advance, and I don't want any word to spread of the Sanking Lightning talismans, so I think we should approach the spirit monarch in secret." "You're right, Brother Mo, in that case. Let's sneak around this stronghold into the spirit race," Han Li agreed with a nod. Silvermoon and Zhu Gyur, naturally, didn't dare to raise any objections either. Thus, the giant ark changed directions and began to fly toward the side. Meanwhile, inside a rectangular building on the giant mountain behind the natural city wall, there was a middle-aged beauty who appeared to be in her 30s, appraising a white wall that was riddled with countless rune formations with her brows slightly furrowed. Letter 1D4F, letter 1D667, letter 1D65A, letter 1D486, letter 1D666C, letter 1D65A, letter 1D658, letter 1D664, letter 1D662. An abnormal fluctuation had just appeared on one part of the formation on the wall, and even though it was extremely faint, it indicated that an extremely powerful treasure had appeared near the stronghold. Otherwise, it wouldn't have registered at all on this formation. With that in mind, the woman called for a subordinate to enter the room, and an armor-clad spirit being immediately strode into the room before extending a respectful bow. "I pay my respects to Mistress Tianjian. Go and take a look at area number 3. There are abnormal fluctuations registering there," the woman immediately instructed. "Yes, mistress," the spirit guard replied in a respectful manner before exiting the room. Moments later, a group of over 100 spirit guards left the spirit sky stronghold to inspect the region that the Ing-Spirit Holy Ark had just been detected in. At this point, the Ing-Spirit Holy Ark was already hundreds of thousands of kilometers, so the guards were naturally unable to discover anything. The woman's brows furrowed even more tightly upon hearing the outcome of their search. The fluctuations were very faint, and it could well be nothing more than a false alarm, but for some reason she couldn't shake this persistent feeling of uneasiness. Perhaps it was time for her to take a rest. After carefully thinking the matter through, the woman decided that her paranoia was simply caused by fatigue due to being overworked, and she quickly forgot about it altogether. Meanwhile, Han Li and the others were flying over a body of inky black water in a stealthy fashion. For some reason, Han Li had stowed the Ing-Spirit Holy Ark away, choosing instead to maximize the output of his protective spiritual light to form a light barrier that covered around an acre in area, encompassing Silvermoon and the others. Mo Jianli was also flying along, while supporting a slightly smaller light barrier. Wisps of yellow mist were revolving outside the light barriers, and an occasional peculiar sound would ring out from the black water down below before impacting the light barriers. As a result, the two light barriers would warp slightly or tremor violently at times, as if they were advancing through some type of powerful force field. All of a sudden, a sharp screeching sound rang out, and a black shadow erupted out of the water down below before flying directly toward Han Li's light barrier at an incredible speed. Han Li raised an eyebrow as he flicked a finger downward, and the black shadow was sent flying back even faster than it had come. This was a small beast that resembled a turtle-toad hybrid, and it was entirely a dark yellow color with a sharp spiked shell and a short and stubby neck. Han Li's nonchalant-looking strike was imbued with extremely fearsome power, and even a top-grade treasure would have most likely been shattered on the spot. However, after plummeting back into the black water, the small beast was able to quickly steady itself and didn't appear to have sustained any substantial injuries. It then let loose a pained cry before plunging deeper into the water, not daring to attack the light barriers up above again. There were quite a large number of these small beasts in this stretch of water, and one or two would jump out almost at set periods to attack the light barriers in the air, but all of them were repelled by Han Li and Mo Jianli with ease. After flying for a few hours, Han Li and the others finally emerged from this region, and a lush mountain range with no end in sight appeared up ahead. We finally entered the true territory of the spirit race. The natural poison of the black water lake wasn't that difficult to deal with, but those dark-toed beasts really were a pain in the backside. Their offensive prowess isn't all that remarkable, but their stamina and durability are both incredible. Even a body integration stage being would have struggled to shake them off, Silvermoon said with a relieved smile. If fellow Taoist Han's arc could have been used to traverse over the lake, then we wouldn't have had to worry about those dark-toed beasts. Unfortunately, the arc just so happens to be susceptible to the restriction within the black water, so it would have been reduced to an even slower speed than what we would have been capable of through flight, Mo Jianli replied with a smile. It's not just my in-spirit holy arc. Most of the flying treasures in the world would be severely impacted when flying over this lake. Throw those dark-toed beasts into the mix, and this place really is a very perilous region to traverse through. It's no wonder that the spirit race hasn't deployed any guards to this area. Having said that, this has made it a lot easier for us to sneak into the spirit race in such a short time. It's a pity that the dark-toed beasts have nothing of value to offer, though. Other beasts of their caliber would normally present much more value, Mo Jianli said as he stroked his beard with a faint smile. Those dark-toed beasts don't possess demon cores, and their bodies can't be refined into treasures or pills, so they don't attract any interest. Had this not been the case, there most likely would no longer be any of those beasts in that area. All right, now that we've made it here, we've already completed half of our objective. We just need to travel to the central region of the spirit race to meet the spirit monarch now. During the rest of our trip, we still have to focus on stealth, so let's not reveal your identities unless we absolutely have to, Han Li said in a confident manner. Mo Jianli and the others all nodded in agreement. Thus, Han Li released the Ink Spirit Holy Arc once again, but on this occasion, he shrank it down significantly so that it was only just over 100 feet in length, and its appearance was also altered to resemble a normal flying arc. Immediately thereafter, Han Li swept a sleeve through the air, and several spatial tempering stage devil crystal puppets appeared before him. Spiritual light flashed over their bodies, and their auras suddenly became extremely similar to those of artifact spirit beings. As long as we don't encounter too much trouble, these puppets should be enough to handle everything while we rest inside the ark, Han Li said with a faint smile. That's a great idea. Those beings of the artifact spirit race arose from artifacts, so they're not that dissimilar to these puppets of yours, Mo Jianli chuckled before drifting into the ark first. He was followed closely by Silvermoon and the others, and Han Li brought up the rear, entering the ark only after everyone else had already done so. Moments later, the black flying ark tremored slightly before departing toward the distance. Meanwhile, in a certain place in the central region of the spirit race, there were two foreign Grand Ascension stage beings that bore a slight resemblance to one another, discussing something in a mysterious manner within a pavilion that was surrounded by layers of restrictions. During their conversation, it could be heard that the term Sanking Lightning Talisman was being brought up on multiple occasions. At the same time, there were 5 translucent jade badges hovering in midair within a pristine white pagoda in a mysterious restricted area of the spirit race. The jade badges were each around a foot in length, with golden arcs of lightning occasionally crackling over their surfaces. Chapter 2268, Concealed Spirit Mountain. The spirit race had a far smaller population compared to the neighboring races, and Han Li and the others had specifically chosen a more secluded route, so they naturally encountered very few spirit beings. Of the few spirit beings that they did encounter, none of them suspected the devil crystal puppets standing on the Ink Spirit Holy Ark, and some of the artifact spirit beings even extended greetings toward their brethren. The puppets responded to those greetings at Han Li's behest, and no suspicions were raised. 2 months later, the Ark finally arrived in Jade Smoke City, the largest city in the spirit race territory. Close to 100,000 kilometers away from this city was the sacred land of the entire spirit race, Concealed Spirit Mountain. The spirit monarch resided on this mountain, alongside some holy guards that had sworn vows to stay on the mountain for as long as they lived. According to the rules of the spirit race, the area within a radius of 15,000 kilometers of this mountain was a restricted region that couldn't be accessed by any spirit beings below the body integration stage. Even those at or above the body integration stage couldn't enter the top half of the mountain without an invitation from the spirit monarch. They would only be able to linger on the bottom half of the mountain for a short time. Letter 1D627, letter 1D4C7, letter 212F, letter 212F, letter 1D464, letter 212F, letter 1D623, letter 1D450, letter 1D630, letter 1D45A. A few years ago, the spirit monarch had suddenly declared that he was going into seclusion to cultivate a mysterious secret technique, and he passed down the duty of overseeing the spirit race to several of his most trusted holy spirits before completely isolating himself on the mountain, refusing to meet anyone. Something like this had never happened in the past, and it naturally created a massive stir in the spirit race. However, the holy spirits were also very authoritative figures, and under their combined efforts, any major unrest was circumvented, but there were naturally many rumors that had arisen. A tense atmosphere had settled over the entire spirit race during this period of time, and Han Li and the others learned about all of this on the way here. They were quite surprised by this unexpected change in the spirit race, but that didn't change their objective of meeting the spirit monarch. After all, the spirit monarch had made a deal with a foreign grand ascension state, being not long, so he was clearly plotting something in secret rather than actually cultivating in seclusion. Regardless of what the spirit monarch was planning, Han Li and Mo Jianli were determined to obtain the Sanking Lightning talismans. After a brief discussion, they decided to park the Ink Spirit Holy Ark near Jade Smoke City, leaving Silvermoon and the others behind, along with all of the devil crystal puppets. After that, the two of them traveled toward Concealed Spirit Mountain together. Even if something were to happen during their meeting with the spirit monarch, the two of them would be able to look after one another. Half a day later, Han Li and Mo Jianli arrived at Concealed Spirit Mountain in a stealthy manner. Han Li looked up and was greeted by the sight of a lush mountain that was over 100,000 feet tall, with a series of 5-colored rainbows above it. Han Li's pupils immediately contracted slightly upon seeing this. He could sense extremely formidable spiritual pressure emanating from this Concealed Spirit Mountain, indicating that it was an immensely powerful treasure not inferior to his extreme mountains. Interesting. The spirit monarch has completely sealed this place at the expense of revealing the holy mountain's true form. Looks like there really is something fishy going on, Mo Jianli mused in an intrigued voice. It was clear that he had also made the same observations as Han Li. Looks like the spirit monarch has set up some extremely powerful restrictions here. Should we scale this mountain? Han Li asked in a calm manner. Why not? The restrictions here are indeed quite powerful, but they're not powerful enough to stop us. Besides, if we don't display some of our power, the spirit monarch may not even be willing to grant us an audience. You're not having cold feet now, are you, fellow Taoist Han? Mo Jianli chuckled. Of course not. I'm more than willing to see this through to the end, Han Li replied with a calm smile, and after a brief discussion, the two of them decided to split up. Mo Jianli made a hand seal as he began to chant something, and a white halo appeared around his body. Immediately thereafter, his body melted away into a puddle of unremarkable transparent liquid, which quickly seeped into the ground. A hint of surprise flashed through Han Li's eyes upon seeing this, and he immediately swept a sleeve through the air, releasing a talisman that exploded into countless purple runes, which inundated his body before disintegrating into clouds of purple mist. Once the mist faded, Han Li had also vanished on the spot. That talisman was none other than a high zenith invisibility talisman that Han Li had refined not long ago. He very rarely used this talisman after reaching the body integration stage, but that didn't mean that the talisman was no longer of much use to him. On the contrary, due to the fact that the talisman was refined using a secret technique from the true immortal realm, its efficacy would increase alongside Han Li's cultivation base. Unfortunately, the materials required to refine this talisman were extremely rare, and he had completely exhausted his supply in the past. Even after making such rapid progress in his cultivation base, he was only able to refine a few more of these talismans, so he naturally wasn't going to use them lightly. With his current abilities, it was extremely rare for him to have to conceal himself, but it was required for him to sneak into this concealed spirit mountain to meet the spirit monarch in secret. After attaining an insubstantial body, Han Li rose up into the air and drifted toward the mountain up ahead. As soon as he entered concealed spirit mountain, he could clearly sense several layers of restriction fluctuations wash over his body, but they were completely unable to detect him. A faint smile appeared on Han Li's face upon seeing this. It was clear that after reaching the Grand Ascension stage, his high zenith invisibility talismans had become even more efficacious. Thus, he didn't hesitate any longer as he drifted straight up toward the mountain peak. Through a spiritual sense connection, he could clearly sense that Mo Jianli had also traveled into the mountain somehow, and he was silently passing through the mountain's rocky terrain without any impediment. Thus, the two of them scaled the mountain in a completely stealthy manner. Along the way, they would occasionally encounter some spirit guards, all of whom wore suits of armor of different colors and possessed powerful auras. Most of them were at the deity transformation stage and spatial tempering stage, which made them high-grade beings among the spirit race. But on this mountain, they were merely ordinary guards. It seemed that this holy mountain really was guarded very securely, but that certainly wasn't going to stop a pair of Grand Ascension stage beings like Han Li and Mo Jianli. Han Li drifted up the mountain without any inhibitions, and he quickly reached the halfway point, upon which he caught sight of a massive purple building in the distance. There was a white-robed middle-aged man seated on each side of the building's entrance, and among the two men, one of them was completely bald, but had a pair of graceful and refined features. As for his companion, this was an extremely hideous man, with pits and bumps all over his face, and a ball of crimson flames burning on his head. However, what drew Han Li's attention naturally wasn't their appearance. Instead, it was the fact that one of them was at the mid-body integration stage, while the other was a late-body integration stage being. Could it be that these were two of the Holy Spirits responsible for overseeing all matters on the Holy Mountain? Even as he was contemplating all of this, Han Li didn't pause for even a moment and quickly passed by the building. The eyes of the two body integration stage spirit beings remained tightly shut, seemingly having completely failed to detect Han Li. A faint smile appeared on Han Li's face upon seeing this, and he was just about to continue onward when the building suddenly began to buzz loudly and flash with purple light. "Who goes there?" The two spirit beings immediately opened their eyes before lashing out one after another. A four-armored Buddha projection that was around 10 feet tall appeared behind the bald spirit being amid a flash of radiant light, and the projection was holding a seven-colored badge that it immediately swept downward. A pillar of rainbow light erupted forth, piercing directly into the ground, while the other spirit being released a crimson net of flames from the ball of flames above his head, which descended right behind the pillar of rainbow light. The pillar of light plunged several thousand feet into the ground in the blink of an eye, striking a transparent figure and immediately forcing him to reveal his true form. It was none other than Mo Jianli. Before had a chance to react, the crimson net was already upon him, and it exploded into scorching flames that swept down from above. Mo Jianli's expression darkened slightly upon seeing this, and he harumphed coldly as he swept a sleeve upward to release a burst of white qi. The oncoming flames were instantly drawn into the white qi upon making contact, yet just as a cold smile appeared on Mo Jianli's face, a crimson talisman suddenly shot out of the flames before exploding into countless crimson threads. In the next instant, red light flashed from Mo Jianli's body without any warning, and a fiery crimson chain appeared around him before instantly binding him tightly. Chapter 2269, Coincidence. Mo Jianli was naturally quite alarmed by this, and his protective spiritual light immediately swelled as he attempted to force the chain open from the inside. But the chain merely expanded alongside his protective spiritual light, rendering him unable to break free. Right at this moment, the Buddha projection behind the bald spirit being had swept its rainbow badge through the air again, and a rumbling boom rang out as the surface of the badge warped and blurred before it released a huge rainbow rune. The rune then quickly transformed into a dazzling hiltless blade of light that was around 10 feet in size. There were even facial features that had appeared on the blade, making it look as if it were a living creature. Even with his grand ascension stage power, Mojangli felt a chill run down his spine as he swept his spiritual sense toward the blade. Right at this moment, the blade began to release a loud buzzing sound, and Mojangli's pupils abruptly contracted as he released several different defensive treasures at once, all of which transformed into balls of spiritual light above him. These were the defensive treasures that he was able to release the quickest under the restriction of the fiery chain. There were other more potent defensive measures that he could take, but he didn't have enough time to unleash them. All of a sudden, the light blade in the air vanished on the spot. At the same time, the defensive treasures above Mojangli were all sliced in half, as if they were nothing more than blocks of tofu. After that, the light blade came slashing down viciously toward Mojangli, and even before it had truly descended upon him, he was already struck by a chilling sensation. Under normal circumstances, Mojangli would be able to easily evade the attack, but he was currently bound by the fiery chain, so he could only look on with a furious expression as the blade came crashing down toward him. A fierce look suddenly appeared on his face, and a miniature figure that was completely identical to him abruptly emerged out of the top of his head amid a flash of spiritual light. He had released his nascent soul, which immediately rose up into the air while wielding a pair of silver swords to oppose the oncoming blade. All of a sudden, a faint azure figure appeared beneath the blade in a wraith-like manner, and with nothing more than a nonchalant punch, he was able to destroy the light blade before appearing just over 100 feet away from Mojangli in a flash. The azure figure was none other than Han Li, and he had arrived at an incredible speed to save Mojangli from his perilous predicament. "Thank you, fellow Taoist Han." Mojangli was naturally ecstatic, and his nascent soul returned to his body again. Now that some respite had finally arrived, he was able to make a hand seal, then opened his mouth to release a burst of white chi that swept toward the fiery chain around him. As soon as the two came into contact with one another, the fiery chain began to emit a peculiar sizzling sound, following which the crimson flames subsided, and cracks began to appear on the chain's surface. Immediately thereafter, Mojangli grabbed onto the chain with his bare hands before violently tearing it apart. The fiery chain was extremely powerful, but it was certainly incapable of trapping a grand ascension stage being, and Mojangli was able to break free from it in just a short time. As for that shattered light blade, it immediately reverted back to its original form at the bald spirit being's behest, but the rainbow badge had become extremely dim. The bald man cast his gaze toward Han Li and Mojangli, and a wary look appeared on his face as he determined that the two of them were both grand ascension stage beings. Meanwhile, the other spirit being had thrown up several mouthfuls of blood essence as soon as the fiery chain had been shattered, and his aura was also diminished significantly. Letter 1d4 BB, letter 1d4 5F, letter 212 F, letter 212 F, letter 1d4 64, letter 1d4 52, letter 1d4 4F, letter 1d4 B8, letter 1d4 5C, letter 1d6 2E. Junior Ling Yin and Junior Zhuo pay their respects to their seniors. "Please forgive us for our insolence. We mistook you for a pair of intruders," the bald man said as he extended a respectful salute. Han Li merely took a step forward, covering a distance of several thousand feet in the blink of an eye to reach the purple building, then inspected the pair of spirit beings with a faint smile. Mojangli arrived beside Han Li immediately thereafter, but his expression was a little sour as he said, "Those two treasures you just used definitely don't belong to the two of you. Were they given to you by the spirit monarch?" Even though it had been a surprise attack, and his two assailants had used extremely powerful treasures, Mojangli was still quite embarrassed to have been forced into such a perilous situation by a pair of body integration stage beings. "Please forgive us, Senior. We were only acting on the orders of our spirit monarch," the bald man hurriedly replied with a slight bow. Mojangli's expression didn't ease in the slightest as he continued, "So it really was the spirit monarch. Why did he bestow these treasures upon you too? It's clear that these treasures were assigned specifically to target grand ascension stage beings like us. Otherwise, I wouldn't have fallen prey to them." The two spirit beings exchanged a hesitant glance, and just as the bald man was about to say something, 6 streaks of light suddenly descended toward them from higher up the mountain. The two spirit beings were elated to see this, while Han Li's expression remained unchanged, and Mo Jianli's eyes narrowed slightly at the sight of the new arrivals. The 6 streaks of light faded, revealing 6 spirit beings in very similar attire to the bald man and his companion. They were also at the body integration stage, and judging from their auras, they were also all carrying powerful treasures. The expressions of all 6 spirit beings changed slightly as they swept their spiritual sense toward Han Li and Mo Jianli, but they didn't seem overly surprised, and that was quite intriguing to Han Li. The bald man was quite relieved to see the arrival of his allies, but he still remained quite respectful to Han Li and Mo Jianli. You came at just the right time, fellow Taoists. I was just about to inform you all that 2 Grand Ascension Stage seniors have come to visit our holy mountain. The 2 of us attacked these 2 seniors, thinking that they were intruders, and were currently extending some apologies toward them. Mo Jianli's expression darkened even further upon hearing this. Now that the situation had been disclosed to more people, he couldn't teach these 2 spirit beings a lesson. Otherwise, the spirit monarch could accuse him of bullying juniors, and that would not be a good starting point to their meeting. The 6 body integration stage spirit beings immediately extended respectful salutes toward Han Li's do as well, and a white-horned elderly man among them said with a wide smile, "It's an honor for our race to welcome 2 esteemed seniors like yourselves. Our spirit monarch is already aware of your arrival, and has been waiting for you 2 at the Purple Chi Hall for quite some time now." He was aware of our arrival. Mo Jianli faltered slightly upon hearing this, and Han Li was also rather taken aback to hear this. "Haven't you 2 arranged to meet our spirit monarch in advance? Are you 2 not Senior Zhu Ran and Senior Hai Lin?" The white-horned elderly man asked with a surprised expression. It was clear that he also realized that there was some kind of misunderstanding. The other body integration stage spirit beings were also quite befuddled by this situation. "I've heard of Zhu Ran and Hai Lin. They're a pair of foreign Grand Ascension stage beings from the tyrannical continent. I've heard that they're quite powerful, but unfortunately, I've never had the chance to meet them. In any case, I'm Mo Jianli of the human race, and this is fellow Taoist Han Li. I'm not sure if you've heard of us before," Mo Jianli said with a smile. An awkward look appeared on the white-horned elderly man's face, but the tone of his voice remained as respectful as ever as he said, "Ah, so it's Senior Mo and Senior Han from the human race. My sincerest apologies for misidentifying you. May I ask why you've suddenly come to our spirit race's holy mountain?" "It's all right, we came here to meet the spirit monarch. Seeing as he's already waiting in the Purple Chi Hall, it looks like we came at just the right time," Mo Jianli chuckled. Han Li was also quite amused by this situation. They had been concerned that the spirit monarch would refuse to see them, but there was no excuse that the spirit monarch could use here. The only thing that they were slightly worried about was that they didn't know what the spirit monarch's intentions were behind suddenly inviting 2 foreign Grand Ascension stage beings to see him. I'm not sure that's appropriate. Our spirit monarch only invited Senior Zhu Ran and Senior Hai Lin. If you'd like to request an audience with him, I'll have to inform him and leave the decision to him," the white-horned elderly man said with a hesitant expression. "So you're saying Zhu Ran and Hai Lin can meet the spirit monarch, but we can't? What do you take our human race for?" Mo Jianli's smile immediately vanished as he took a step forward, releasing a devastating aura as he did so. Chapter 2270, The Spirit Monarch. All 8 of the body integration stage spirit beings possessed powerful treasures, but they were still forced back several steps by Mo Jianli's fearsome Grand Ascension stage aura, and a hint of fear appeared in all of their eyes. "It was never my intention to insult the human race, Senior," the white-robed elderly man hurriedly yelled as sweat began to pour down his forehead. However, Mo Jianli merely elevated his aura even further, as if he didn't hear what the elderly man had just said. The 8 body integration stage spirit beings were no longer able to contend with Mo Jianli's spiritual pressure, and only after 8 projections of different treasures emerged from their bodies were they able to stand their ground. Han Li immediately determined the treasures to be 3 talismans, 2 badges, a small white cauldron, and a silver scepter. Mo Jianli harumphed coldly upon seeing this, and he was just about to take another step forward and unleash his full spiritual pressure to teach these 8 juniors a lesson when all of a sudden, a gentle breeze swept past Mo Jianli. A warm aura swirled around Mo Jianli's body, and the fearsome spiritual pressure that he was releasing was instantly nullified. Immediately thereafter, a gentle elderly voice rang out from within the breeze. Allow me to offer my apologies on behalf of these juniors. Brother Mo, I am honored that the two of you have decided to visit me. There's no way I would refuse an audience with you. I'll be waiting at the summit for the two of you. Ling Mai, I've detected through my spiritual sense that Zhu Ran and Hai Lin have already arrived at the foot of the mountain. 4 of you, go and greet them, while the rest invite Brother Mo to the Purple Chi Hall. Yes, Spirit Monarch. The 8 body integration stage spirit beings extended respectful bows toward the mountain summit in unison, then withdrew their treasures projections, and the bald man immediately traveled down the mountain with 3 companions, while the white-horned elderly man and the others made inviting hand gestures toward Han Li and Mo Giantly. Seeing as the spirit monarch has spoken, I'll let things slide for now, Mo Giantly said after a brief pause, then flew up toward the mountain summit. Han Li followed along behind him with a faint smile, and he was followed by the 4 remaining body integration stage spirit beings. As they were flying up the mountain, the white-horned elderly man was surreptitiously appraising Han Li from behind with a peculiar expression. Even though Han Li hadn't said anything just now, all of the holy spirits of the spirit race were aware that he was a new grand ascension stage being that had just arisen among the human race. There wasn't much information about him, but there was a confirmed rumor stating that he had once severely wounded a grand ascension stage being from the Xianxia race. This evoked a sense of fear and curiosity within the elderly man toward Han Li. The spirit realm was a massive place, but there were very few people capable of defeating veteran grand ascension stage beings after only just progressing to the grand ascension stage. Han Li naturally didn't know what the elderly man was thinking, and nor did he have any interest in the elderly man's thoughts. He was slowly drifting up the mountain while appraising his surroundings. The top half of Concealed Spirit Mountain was rife with restrictions and formations, far more so than the second half, but most of the formations had been deactivated to grant them passage. Otherwise, even as Grand Ascension stage beings, it wouldn't be this easy for Han Li and Mo Jianli to travel up the mountain. It appeared that there were only less than 10,000 feet to the summit of the mountain, but it ended up taking them quite a while to arrive at the top, and it seemed that the journey up the top half of the mountain actually spanned over 1 million feet. This was quite surprising to both Mo Jianli and Han Li. It seemed that aside from the restrictions on the mountain, there was something else extremely profound about it. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been able to fool Han Li and Mo Jianli's spiritual sense. The white-horned elderly man and the others were unsurprised by this, seemingly already accustomed to this phenomenon. After passing through a thin blanket of white mist, the 7 of them finally arrived at the mountain summit. Han Li looked around to find on the vast expanse of land on the mountain summit, there stood only a single 3-story pavilion. Letter 1D41F, letter 1D5FF, letter 1D41E, letter 1D68E, letter 1D6A0, letter 1D41E, letter 1D554, letter 1D560, letter 1D696. Above the entrance of the pavilion was a plaque with the words Purple Chi Hall inscribed upon it in flowing golden text. There was not a single person to be seen outside the pavilion. Our spirit monarch is waiting inside. We won't be able to accompany you any further, so please go in on your own, seniors, the white-horned elderly man said as he extended a respectful salute. All right, then you can all wait outside. Mo Jianli immediately strode toward the pavilion after sweeping his spiritual sense toward it. Through his spiritual sense detection, he discovered that this Purple Chi Hall wasn't giving off any restriction fluctuations, and aside from a faint, peculiar aura within it, it really did seem to be nothing more than a normal pavilion. As such, he naturally wasn't going to be wary of entering the pavilion. Han Li followed along closely behind him, and after entering the pavilion, the two arrived in a giant hall that was around 400 to 500 feet in size. Pots of floral trees that were several feet tall were placed throughout the hall, and there, on those trees, grew fist-sized flowers of all types of different colors. In front of one of the pots stood a white-robed elderly man, who had his hands clasped behind his back and was facing away from the entrance. "Are you the spirit monarch?" Mo Jianli asked with a slightly cautious expression. "Please take a seat, fellow Taoists." The white-robed elderly man didn't directly reply to Mo Jianli's question. Mo Jianli appraised the elderly man for a while longer before doing as he was told. Han Li also took a seat on another chair, before casting his gaze toward the white-robed elderly man. "I'm used to living here on my own, so I can only offer you some tea. I hope you don't mind." the white-robed elderly man said with a faint smile. As soon as his voice trailed off, a side door was opened, and several small white monkeys sprang into the room. Each of the monkeys was around half a foot tall, with snowy white fur and crimson eyes. The little monkeys were carrying teapots and teacups on their heads, and they quickly poured Han Li and Mo Jianli a cup of fragrant spirit tea each. Han Li took a glance at the spirit tea before downing the cup of tea in one go, while Mo Jianli didn't even take a single glance at the tea as he asked, "I'm sure you're already aware of the reason for our visit, right, fellow Taoist?" "I've heard of you for a long time, fellow Taoist Mo, but this is our first meeting. How would I know the purpose for your visit?" the white-robed elderly man said as he finally turned around. He had a head of white hair, but a set of surprisingly youthful features. His eyes were bright and piercing, but his expression was very calm, and there was a purple maple leaf embroidered on one of his sleeves. "All right then, setting that aside for now, why have you invited fellow Taoist Zhu Ran and fellow Taoist Hai Lin to see you?" Mo Jianli asked. The white-robed elderly man's pupils contracted slightly upon hearing this, but he still replied in a calm manner, "I invited them here to make a deal with them. Are you interested as well, brother Mo?" "Hee, what a coincidence. We also came here to make a deal with you," Mo Jianli chuckled. "I'll have to disappoint you then, fellow Taoist Mo. I only make deals with people I'm familiar with, so I'm afraid I'll have to turn you down," the white-robed elderly man replied without any hesitation. Mo Jianli's eyes narrowed slightly upon hearing this, and he suddenly raised a hand to release a streak of silver light. The white-robed elderly man remained still on the spot, but the streak of silver light abruptly drew to a halt on its own around 10 feet away from him. This was a shimmering silver jade slip, engraved with the same purple maple leaf design as the one on the elderly man's sleeve. The white-robed elderly man's expression darkened slightly upon seeing this, and he raised a hand to draw the silver jade slip into his grasp. After a brief inspection, he sighed, "Looks like fellow Taoist Shi Zin has passed away. Did you do this, or did he perish to the Stembora Queen?" "The Stembora Queen didn't directly kill him, but it was definitely indirectly responsible," Mo Jianli replied in a calm manner. "All right, I don't care how you managed to obtain this token, but seeing as it's in your possession, I'll include you too on this deal. However, the rest will be up to you," the white-robed elderly man said as he stowed the jade slip away amid a flash of silver light. Mo Jianli's eyes lit up upon hearing this. "Of course, we were only searching for an opportunity away." Please don't take any offense to this, fellow Taoist Mo, but with your abilities, it'll be next to impossible for you to satisfy the conditions of the deal I propose. In contrast, your companion has a decent chance. This is the vastly renowned fellow Taoist Han Li, right? As expected, he really is incomparable with normal Grand Ascension stage beings, the white-robed elderly man said with a hint of mockery in his eyes, but that transitioned into a more serious expression as he cast his gaze toward Han Li. "I'm truly honored that you've heard of me, fellow Taoist spirit monarch, but aren't you being a little too disrespectful to brother Mo and myself?" Han Li replied with a faint smile. Chapter 2271, Zhu Ran and Hai Lin. The elderly man faltered slightly upon hearing this. "What do you mean by that, fellow Taoist Han? If you mean no disrespect to us, then why have you welcomed us with a mere clone?" Han Li asked. "Clone?" It was Mo Jianli's turn to be surprised now. He hurriedly swept his spiritual sense toward the elderly man, but all he could sense was that the elderly man's aura was unfathomable to him, and his expression immediately darkened. The elderly man was rather taken aback, and after staring at Han Li for a short while, he chuckled, "You have an exceptional eye, fellow Taoist Han. I must say I'm truly impressed. However, the fact that I mean no disrespect to the two of you still remains true. I'm sure that you've heard prior to your arrival that I'm currently in seclusion, and that is the truth. My true body is indeed currently in seclusion and unable to meet you two, which was why I had to send this clone. Truth be told, I was planning to meet with fellow Taoist Zhu Ran and fellow Taoist Hai Lin using this clone as well," the white-robed elderly man admitted. Mo Jianli's expression changed slightly upon hearing this, and he was just about to say something when an unfamiliar male voice rang out from outside the pavilion. "You were planning to greet us with a mere clone. Where is your sincerity, brother spirit? Could it be that you're in a seclusion of life and death? Otherwise, are we not worthy of an audience with your true body?" As soon as the voice trailed off, two dark-skinned figures, foreign beings, with a layer of scales covering half of their bodies, strode into the hall. The two of them were quite similar in appearance, and one of them had a layer of baleful crimson light enveloping his entire body, while the had countless balls of black chi revolving around him, forming countless tiny vortexes that were drawing in the nearby world's origin chi incessantly. Forgive me for not coming out to greet you sooner, fellow Taoists. I'm currently not in a seclusion of life and death, but this seclusion is very important nonetheless, and it will all be for naught if I come out too early, the white-robed elderly man explained with a smile. HMPH, I should teach you. One of the foreign beings immediately flared up with rage, but his companion cut him off and said, "It's all right, Brother Hai. We're not here to make friends anyway, so what does it matter if this is Brother Spirit's true body as long as he can give us what we want? Let's not waste any time with pointless arguments. By the way, who are these two fellow Taoists, Brother Spirit? You never mentioned that you invited others for this deal." Zhu Ran cast a cold gaze toward Han Li and Mo Jianli as he spoke, and even with his grand ascension stage powers, Mo Jianli felt a chill run down his spine in response to the Zhu Ran's gaze. It was clear that Zhu Ran had cultivated some type of spiritual sense-secret technique that posed a threat even to grand ascension stage beings. Otherwise, just his gaze alone wouldn't have such an intimidatory effect. As for Han Li, he remained completely unmoved by Zhu Ran's gaze, and the two foreign beings exchanged a surprised glance upon seeing this, following which the disdain on their faces receded slightly. "Allow me to explain, fellow Taoist Zhu Ran. Tracing back to the beginning, you two weren't even the first people I approached for this deal. Instead, it was fellow Taoist Shizin. Even though fellow Taoist Shizin has perished, fellow Taoist Han and fellow Taoist Mo have brought his token to me, so I naturally couldn't refuse them. Thankfully, I have enough Sanking Lightning talismans for all of you, but you'll have to give me what I want in exchange," the elderly man said in an unhurried manner. Letter 1D65B, letter 1D493, letter 1D4E, letter 1D65A, letter 1D500, letter 1D486, letter 1D658, letter 1D490, letter 1D4AT. The two of us are determined to obtain those Sanking Lightning talismans, Brother Spirit. We immediately rushed over upon hearing that you were offering these talismans in a deal, and we cleared out the entire treasure vault on our island, so tell us what you want. As long as it's something that we have, we'll definitely hand it over, Zhu Ran said in a serious manner. The same applies for fellow Taoist Han and myself. We're also willing to do everything in our power to secure those Sanking Lightning talismans, Mo Jianli chimed in as well. There's no rush. I made the spirit tea myself. Please have some before we continued our discussion, the elderly man said. The two foreign Grand Ascension stage beings' brows furrowed slightly upon hearing this, but after exchanging a few words through voice transmission, Zhu Ran nodded and said, "All right, I've heard that the spirit tea from your spirit race is quite exceptional. It certainly couldn't hurt to have a taste." Thus, the two foreign Grand Ascension stage beings also took a seat on two nearby chairs. The small white monkeys seemed to be very intelligent, and they scampered over to pour cups of spirit tea for the two dark-skinned beings, even without requiring instructions from the spirit monarch, and only then did they depart from the hall. After Zhu Ran and Hai Lin had also had some tea, the white-robed elderly man finally cut to the chase. "I know that all four of you are here for the Sanking Lightning talismans, but before we begin our discussion, I must ask if there are any rare treasures or materials that you're interested in aside from those talismans. You can take a look at a list I've compiled before deciding what you want. Otherwise, once the terms of the deal are finalized, they can't be changed." "There's no need for that. We came all this way here specifically for those talismans. No matter how precious other treasures are, they won't be of any use to us if we can't transcend our next heavenly tribulations," Zhu Ran immediately replied with a shake of his head. Hai Lin merely remained silent with a cold smile on his face, not even bothering to answer the question. Mo Jianli replied, "My answer is the same. What about you, fellow Taoist Han?" "I'm actually quite interested to see what else you can offer, Brother Spirit," Han Li said with a smile. "In that case, please take a look at my list, Brother Han." The elderly man didn't waste any time and immediately swept a sleeve through the air to release a ball of azure light. Han Li caught the ball of azure light to find that it was a green jade slip, and he immediately pressed it to his forehead before injecting his spiritual sense into it. Everyone else immediately turned their attention toward him, and after a short while, Han Li removed the jade slip from his forehead with a faint sigh before tossing it back to the spirit monarch. "None of those items were appealing to you, fellow Taoist Han?" the white-robed elderly man asked as he stowed the jade slip away. Every item on the list is extremely precious, and some of them are very difficult to find even in other realms. However, none of them are anywhere near as appealing to me as the Sanking Lightning Talismans, Han Li replied. The elderly man wasn't very surprised to hear this. That's quite a pity. I also hold those talismans in very high regard and would be very happy if you could accept a substitute, but it seems that won't be possible. All right, all four of us have made our decisions, so tell us what your proposed deal involves. You must also be searching for something quite valuable in exchange, right? Hai Lin prompted in an impatient manner. I'm sure all four of you are aware of just how valuable Sanking Lightning talismans are. The item that I want in exchange is naturally not going to be far off in value. However, I'm sure none of you are in possession of this item. Otherwise, I would have already revealed what it was, the elderly man replied. HMPH, your letter didn't stipulate any items for exchange. Instead, you implied that you wanted us to do something extremely dangerous in exchange for those talismans. Having said that, don't underestimate us Grand Ascension stage beings of the sea. The sea is far more abundant with precious resources than beings from small races like you can imagine. We've discovered 7 or 8 ancient seabed cave abodes, and some of the treasures in there are no less valuable than Sanking Lightning talismans. Perhaps you'd be willing to change your mind if we were to bring out some of those items, Zhu Ran said. I've also encountered some miraculous opportunities during my cultivation and obtained treasures of equal value to the Sanking Lightning talisman. Otherwise, I wouldn't have made this trip, Mo Jianli chimed in with a confident expression. And Li merely remained silent, with a faint smile on his face. I'm sure that all of you possess treasures no lesser in value than my Sanking Lightning talismans, but just like how these talismans are integral for the transcendence of your heavenly tribulations, the item I'm looking for also concerns my survival. As such, I won't exchange my Sanking Lightning talismans for anything else, the elderly man said in a decisive manner. Chapter 2272, Small Usura Realm. There's no need to waste further time, fellow Taoist spirit. Just tell us exactly what it is you would like us to do, Mo Jianli urged. All right, your wish is my command. I currently require a thread of time to save my life, and I'm willing to exchange one Sanking Lightning talisman for each thread of time. What do you think? The white-robed elderly revealed. Everyone faltered slightly upon hearing this, and Hai Lin immediately flared up with rage. You require a thread of time. Is that supposed to be a joke? How can we possibly find such a legendary item? Threads of time were extraordinary items that could only be born in the river of time, which contained the law of time. However, there was no way that a river of time could appear in a lower realm like the spirit realm. Only in the true immortal realm would one be able to find a few of these incredible rivers. Mo Jianli's expression also darkened upon hearing this. Brother Spirit, are you proposing this deal without any sincerity? Han Li had naturally also read about threads of time and rivers of time in some ancient tomes, and he was stroking his chin with a contemplative expression as he quickly reviewed the information that he had read. Even among all of the treasures that only existed in legends, threads of time were considered to be extremely precious, and its main effect was that it could extend one's lifespan. It was said that the power of time imbued within a single thread of time could extend a mortal or a low-grade cultivator's lifespan by over 1,000 years, while for beings of their caliber, thread of time had the incredible ability to delay heavenly tribulations. A thread of time could delay a minor heavenly tribulation by over 500 years, and a major heavenly tribulation by over a century. Of course, those were only legend, as no one had ever truly seen these threads in action. However, one thing was for sure. No rivers of time had ever appeared in any of the lower realms. Could it be that the spirit monarch was requesting this item as he was? And Li cast his gaze toward the white-robed elderly man, and a peculiar look appeared in his eyes. The spirit monarch chuckled. I wouldn't dare to waste your time by making such tasteless jokes, fellow Taoists. The most premium threads of time can indeed only be born in rivers of time, but I don't specifically require threads of time of that caliber. Even if you could find threads of time of the lowest caliber, I'd exchange Sanking Lightning talismans for them without any hesitation. It's next to impossible to obtain naturally arising threads of time, but it's not impossible for us to refine artificial threads of time. Hai Lin and Mo Jianli faltered slightly upon hearing this, before both of them fell into deep thought. In contrast, a thought seemed to suddenly occur to Zhu Ran, and a hint of surprise appeared on his face. Looks like you already know what I'm referring to, Fellow Taoist Zhu Ran, the spirit monarch said in an unhurried manner. Brother Zhu. Lin turned to Zhu Ran with an inquisitive expression, while Han Li and Mo Jianli exchanged a silent glance. If I'm not mistaken, you must be referring to the Usra spiders that can only be found in the small Usra realm, which appeared once many years ago. Aside from that, I can't think of any other place where you can obtain artificial threads of time, Zhu Ran said. Small Usra realm. Usra spider. Mo Jianli and Lin exclaimed in unison, while Han Li blinked in a perplexed manner. This was the first time he was hearing these two names. That's right. The Usra spider is born with the innate ability to control space and time. If you can kill a few of these spiders, you should be able to refine artificial threads of time from their cores. This will certainly be far easier than searching for a river of time, the spirit monarch replied. HMPH, you sure make it sound simple, setting aside how perilous the small Usra realm is and how fearsome the Usra spiders are. The entrance to that realm had completely collapsed during the battle that had taken place 200,000 years ago. How are we supposed to access it? Zhu Ran harumphed coldly. I've naturally made preparations for that. Please take a look at this, the spirit monarch said with a faint smile, then flipped a hand over to reveal a ball of crimson light. Han Li focused his gaze on the ball of crimson light, to find that it contained a crimson fist-sized rock with an extremely rough surface that was riddled with countless tiny holes. That's an Usra heart. Where did you obtain this item, brother spirit? Mo Jianli's expression changed drastically at the sight of the object. Zhu Ran and Lin clearly also recognized it, and incredulous looks appeared on their faces as well. As for Han Li, this was the first time he had heard of this Usra heart, so he naturally displayed no reaction. Letter 1D4 1F, letter 1D6 9B, letter 1D5 5 6, letter 1D6 8, letter 1D5 6 8, letter 1D5 F2, letter 1D4 1C, letter 1D5 FC, letter 1D5 FA. However, Mo Jianli immediately offered him an explanation through voice transmission. The small Usra realm once emerged in the southern region of our Tian Yuan continent 200,000 years ago. The realm is quite small, but everything within it is extremely similar to that of the Usra realm, which collapsed and completely vanished in ancient times. The presence of Usra spider is one of the most symbolic similarities between the two realms. Thus, many people have speculated that the small Usra realm is a section of the Usra realm that was somehow spared during the latter's collapse. In order to fight over this realm, several nearby super races had engaged in a fierce clash, unintentionally destroying the entrance to the realm in the process and causing it to disappear again. For that, all of the super races were quite remorseful for a very long time. Mo Jianli's voice transmission cut off there. I see, so what is this Usra heart? You seem to be extremely surprised to see it, Han Li also asked through voice transmission. Usra hearts are items manifested from the hearts of powerful creatures in the small Usra realm. They contain a type of mysterious energy unique to the small Usra realm, and they were originally used only for tool and pill refinement. But after the entrance to the realm was destroyed, some people discovered that these hearts could be used in conjunction with a type of defunct ancient super formation to directly enter the small Usra realm. However, during this time, those who entered the small Usra realm ought to refine the Usra heart into some type of protective treasure to oppose the resistance from the realm. The energy within that treasure will slowly be expended, and once it's been completely exhausted, the resistance of the small Usra realm would automatically eject that person. Unfortunately, the creatures that possess Usra hearts in the small Usra realm are extremely difficult to kill, so there aren't many of these Usra hearts in existence. After the entrance to the realm collapsed, almost all of the remaining Usra hearts were used up over time, so it came as quite a surprise to me that the spirit monarch is in possession of them, Mo Jianli explained. Han Li nodded with a contemplative expression upon hearing this. As the two of them were conversing with one another, Zhu Ran had already accepted the Usra heart from the spirit monarch and was carefully examining it. After a long while, he heaved a long sigh and asked, "This is indeed an Usra heart. How many of these do you have in our possession, brother spirit?" "Two," the spirit monarch replied. "Two, each Usra heart can only teleport one person into the small Usra realm. Are you planning to select two of us to enter the small Usra realm?" Zhu Ran asked as his expression darkened slightly. Mo Jianli's expression also changed slightly upon hearing this. "Rest assured, fellow Taoists, after some improvements I made, these Usra hearts can be split into halves. However, one Usra heart only contains enough energy for one person to remain in the small Usra realm for around a month, and with each half, you would only be able to remain in the realm for around half a month. I'm sure that with your abilities, this will be more than enough time to track down Usra spiders, the spirit monarch replied in a calm manner. HMPH, that'll be a matter of luck considering the limited time that we have, Zhu Ran harumphed coldly. If I recall correctly, you two possess the bloodlines of the two true spirits, the blood-flame six-headed spider and the black-scale heavenly dragon spider, right? This might not be enough time for others to track down Usra spiders, but with your bloodline sensory abilities to guide you, there should be a very good chance, the spirit monarch replied with a smile. Looks like you've done a lot of homework on us too, Zhu Ran said, as a cold light flashed through both his and Hai Lin's eyes. I originally invited fellow Taoist Xizin, as he possessed the bloodline of the thousand-eyed evil spider bloodline, which should have made it even easier for him to track down Usra spiders in the small Usra realm. However, seeing as he perished in the Elder Devil realm, I could only turn to you. Thankfully, the small Usra realm isn't a large place, so even without your bloodline sensory abilities, you'll have some chances of tracking down Usra spiders. Had it not been for fellow Taoist Shizin's unexpected demise, and the fact that I urgently require these threads of time, I wouldn't even have allowed Brother Mo and fellow Taoist Han to get in on this deal. However, seeing as they came to me with the relevant token, I could only oblige. Now then, I've said everything that needs to be said. Are you willing to venture into the small Usra realm? The spirit monarch asked in a calm manner. No one offered an immediate reply. Chapter 2273, Icy Peak. I've heard that as soon as Usra spiders are born, they already possess nascent soul stage powers at a minimum, and that as they grow, their powers are rapidly enhanced, to the extent that they'll possess powers infinitely approaching the grand ascension stage once they reach full maturity. There are even some Usra spiders with exceptional aptitude that are comparable in power to true spirits. In order to be able to refine threads of time, we'll have to kill mature Usra spiders, right? Mo giantly asked. You sure know a lot about these Usra spiders, Brother Mo indeed. Threads of time can only be extracted from mature Usra spiders, and it'll generally take the cores of 3 Usra spiders to refine a single thread of time. Of course, if you encounter an Usra spider that's powerful enough, only 1 core will be required, the spirit monarch replied. Ojinli fell silent as a wry smile appeared on his face, while Zhu Ran and Hai Lin's expressions darkened even further. After a short while, Zhu Ran asked in a cold voice, the small Usra realm is already fraught with perils, and mature Usra spiders possess the ability to control time to a certain extent. Even if they're not quite at the Grand Ascension stage, they won't be any easier to deal with than the average Grand Ascension stage being. On top of that, we'll have to kill at least 3 of them each to extract a single thread of time. We'll essentially be risking our lives the entire time. Don't you think just a single Sanking Lightning talisman is insufficient compensation? I don't think that's the case. Aside from those talismans, I've also brought out these 2 Usra hearts. Considering how rare they are, they're only slightly inferior in value to Sanking Lightning talismans. On top of that, the small Usra realm has always been renowned as a place that's abundant with precious resources, so you should reap many rewards on your trip regardless of whether you manage to track down Usra spiders. You can keep everything you obtain during your trip as an additional reward, the spirit monarch replied. That's not the same thing. The Usra hearts are required for us to enter the small Usra realm, so they shouldn't count as part of the compensation. Besides, with half an Usra heart each, we'll only be able to remain in the small Usra realm for around half a month. How will we have any time to search for additional treasures on top of Usra spiders? Even if, by some immense stroke of fortune, we do find some valuable treasures, it's still not comparable to the risk that we're incurring. At our cultivation bases, safety is the most important thing. Don't forget that all of us want Sanking Lightning talismans to ensure our safety during our next heavenly tribulations, Zhu Ran said in a cold voice. Everyone else remained silent, but they were clearly in agreement with Zhu Ran's words. The spirit monarch's brows furrowed slightly upon hearing this, and only after a brief pause did he reply, in that case, if you can obtain threads of time from the small Usra realm, I'll be willing to offer 3 treasures of your choice from the list I just presented in addition to a Sanking Lightning talisman for each thread of time. This is the final concession I'm willing to make. If you're still not satisfied, then you can leave and I'll find someone else. All right, you have yourself a deal. Have you prepared the teleportation formation required to travel to the small Usra realm? We can't stay here for very long, Zhu Ran replied without any hesitation. The spirit monarch replied with a confident smile, "Rest assured, fellow Taoist Zhu, the teleportation formation has already been prepared, and it's situated on this holy mountain. If you're willing to go, I can teleport all of you to the small Usra realm right away. What's your decision, brother Mo, fellow Taoist Han?" A hesitant look appeared on Mo Jianli's face, but he soon gritted his teeth as he replied, "I'm determined to obtain the Sanking Lightning Talismans, so I'm also willing to enter the small Usra realm. In that case, I'll be accompanying Brother Mo to the small Usra realm as well. However, I have a condition. Please allow me to decide the coordinates that we return to from the small Usra realm," Han Li said in a calm manner. A hint of displeasure appeared on the spirit monarch's face upon hearing this. "Why are you making such a request, fellow Taoist Han? Do you not trust me?" "No, it's just that I'm used to controlling as many factors as I can. I hope you can understand. I know a thing or two about teleportation formations, so it won't be a very difficult task for me to alter the teleportation coordinates," Han Li replied. "Letter 1D4 1F, letter 1D5 3, letter 1D5 F2, letter 1D5 6, letter 1D5 8, letter 1D5 F2, letter 1D5 F0, letter 1D6 8, letter 1D4 6. I think that's a great idea. I'm also quite familiar with teleportation formations, so I'll set my own return coordinates as well. If you don't agree to this request, then I'm going to have to question your sincerity, brother spirit." Zhu Ran chuckled as he appraised the spirit monarch with a hint of a smile on his face. "All right, in that case, you're free to decide your own return coordinates, but I'd advise you not to set the coordinates to outside of our spirit race's territory. Otherwise, if you return too late, I may assume that a mishap has occurred and offer the Sanking Lightning Talismans in an exchange to someone else. I'm sure you're aware of just how precious these talismans are. If I were to spread word of their existence, many fellow Taoists will immediately come to see me," the spirit monarch said. "Haha, rest assured, brother spirit. With our bloodline sensory abilities, there should be a 70% to 80% chance that we find Usra spiders. After half a month, we'll be back to complete our deal," Zhu Ran replied with a pleased expression. "Fellow Taoist Han and I will also do our best," Mo Jianli replied. "All right, then it's decided. Stay here for a night to make some preparations, and I'll teleport all four of you into the small Usra realm tomorrow morning," the spirit monarch said before clapping his hands together twice, and a side door opened, upon which several young women in palatial dresses made their way into the room. They extended respectful curtsies toward Han Li and the others before standing on either side of them. Zhu Ran nodded, before rising to his feet and departing with Hai Lin and two of the women. After that, Mo Jianli stood up and cupped his fist in a salute toward the spirit monarch, before also turning to depart. However, as Han Li stood up from his chair, he didn't immediately leave. Instead, he smiled and said, "There's a question I'd like to ask, but I'm not sure if it's appropriate." The spirit monarch was rather taken aback to hear this, but he still replied, "Go ahead, fellow Taoist Han. I've heard some rumors that state that the spirit realm has only had a single spirit monarch since its arrival in the spirit realm. Is that true? How old are you right now, brother spirit?" Han Li asked with a smile. Mo Jianli and the spirit monarch both faltered slightly upon hearing this before the latter chuckled. "Haha, I've heard those rumors as well, but of course, they're not true. Our spirit race has been in this realm for over 1,000,000 years. While it's indeed true that our heavenly tribulations are spaced further apart than for other beings, how could a single spirit monarch possibly live for that long?" Having said that, there were a few spirit monarchs that reigned for a very long time, and that's most likely where the rumors stemmed from. "I see, that makes sense. After all, this is the spirit realm, not the true immortal realm. How could someone possibly live for over 1,000,000 years here?" Han Li said with a faint smile before departing with Mo Jianli and two of the other spirit women. Following their departure, the smile on the spirit monarch's face immediately faded. Why did he mention the true immortal realm? Could it be that he's onto something? Then again, he isn't the first person to have asked me that, the spirit monarch murmured to himself in a barely audible voice. He then made a hand seal and vanished on the spot amid a flash of white light. Moments later, he reappeared in a white light formation within a pitch-black space deep in the belly of concealed Spirit Mountain. He swept his gaze around this dark space, and his brows furrowed slightly as he abruptly swept a sleeve upward. Round a dozen balls of light immediately emerged before hovering high up in the air. After that, the spirit monarch made a hand seal, and the balls of light brightened significantly to illuminate the entire space. Around 300 to 400 feet away from him stood a translucent icy mountain that was over 10,000 feet tall, and a massive golden rune encompassed most of the entire mountain. Through the transparent ice, one could see a handsome golden-robed young man at the bottom of the icy mountain, and he was unconscious with a series of rune chains binding his entire body. On his glabella was a golden rune identical to the one on the icy mountain, and the spirit monarch immediately reached out to press a hand against the mountain, while releasing threads of white light out of his palm in a frenzy. Chapter 2274, Golden Hand Immortal Palace. The golden rune on the icy mountain immediately began to glow with scintillating light, and the white threads that had been injected into the mountain converged to form a miniature humanoid figure that was around a foot tall. The miniature figure was identical to the spirit monarch both in appearance and attire, and its eyes were tightly shut. The spirit monarch then tapped a finger against his own glabella, and a translucent white thread erupted forth before plunging into the icy mountain and vanishing into the miniature humanoid figure's forehead in a flash. The miniature figure slowly opened its eyes, revealing a pair of golden pupils. "Thank you for your hard work. We're finally on the verge of success. After obtaining the threads of time, we'll be able to significantly shorten the amount of time required to refine this man. Otherwise, it'll take me at least 10,000 more years to refine him, and who knows what could happen during that time," the miniature figure said in a voice that was also identical to that of the spirit monarch. "That would naturally be best, but it's a pity that we have to offer those sanking lightning talismans for exchange. Those talismans were reserved to assist the most talented juniors of our spirit race to transcend their major heavenly tribulations," the spirit monarch sighed. "Can't be helped. I did possess some talismans and pills from the true immortal realm that can't be found in the lower realms, but they've all been used up over time. So the only things in my possession that'll tempt those grand ascension stage beings are the sanking lightning talismans. By the way, isn't that Han Li one of the people who ventured into the Elder Devil realm with Thousand Autumns and the others?" the miniature figure asked. "They are indeed one and the same. I don't know what happened during their journey into the Elder Devil realm, but he was the sole survivor while Thousand Autumns and the others all perished. On top of that, he progressed to the Grand Ascension stage as soon as he returned to the spirit realm, and during his celebratory ceremony, he was able to severely wound a Grand Ascension stage Yaksha being with ease, so he's definitely no ordinary Grand Ascension cultivator," the spirit monarch said with a slightly solemn expression. "It looks like he must have entered the spirit cleansing pond and consumed a clean spirit lotus. Otherwise, he wouldn't be this powerful. This is a good thing. The more powerful he is, the greater the chance that he'd be able to obtain a thread of time in the small Usra realm," the miniature figure replied. "I was thinking the same thing. Otherwise, if Mo Giantly had been accompanied by Ao Zio, I wouldn't have agreed to let them in on the deal," the spirit monarch said with a faint smile. "All right, seeing as everything is progressing smoothly, I'll leave everything to you. I have to focus on refining this true immortal soul now. Don't awaken me again until they've returned from the small Usra realm," the miniature figure said. The spirit monarch nodded in response and said with a smile, "You and I are one entity, so I would also benefit immensely if you could successfully refine an immortal soul pill." The miniature figure also nodded in response, before dissipating into specks of spiritual light. After that, a teleportation formation emerged on its own beneath the spirit monarch's feet, and he was teleported away amid a flash of white light. On a continent in the true immortal realm that stretched as far as the eyes could see, there were countless farmers in yellow robes tending to well-organized fields of crops. Upon closer inspection, one would discover that all of these farmers wore completely wooden expressions, and they were all extremely lifelike humanoid puppets. Within those fields were planted massive rice crops with thick stems that were giving off incredibly pure spiritual qi, striking one with a sense of reinvigoration through inhalation alone. In the air above the fields were spirit clouds of different colors, each of which was around an acre in size, and atop the clouds sat a series of robed figures holding a different item. These people either occupied a cloud alone or in groups of 2 or 3, and all of them wore Taoist robes as they patrolled the air above the fields, occasionally releasing a shower of rain from their spirit clouds to nourish the fields down below. Even higher up in the air was a sea of mist at an altitude of over 100,000 feet with no end in sight, looking as if it encompassed the entire continent. A series of spirit birds and spirit beasts were traversing through the mist, carrying some people in different attire in and out of the sea of mist. All of a sudden, a dragon's roar rang out, and a blue ice worm that was over 1,000 feet in length appeared in the distant sky. The blue ice worm reached the air above the fields in the blink of an eye, and the arrival of such a gigantic creature would immediately strike horror and panic into the hearts of ordinary beings if it were to appear in the spirit realm. However, the farmers down below and the Taoists atop the clouds simply ignored it. Only a few of the Taoists took a brief glance at it, but that was all the attention it received. Upon catching sight of the ice worm, a surprised look appeared on the face of a young Taoist who appeared to only be around 12 to 13 years of age. "Isn't that Master Li? He only left the Immortal Palace a few days ago. Why is he back already?" the young Taoist murmured. "He looks to be in quite a hurry, so he must be doing something quite important, and it doesn't appear to be going very well," another Taoist mused. "Perhaps, having said that, Master Li's powers rank among the top 100 of our Golden Hand Immortal Palace. What could possibly be beyond his capabilities in this immortal region? If you and I could become disciples of Master Li, that would be a brilliant opportunity," the first Taoist said. "Stop daydreaming. You and I are disciples of the lowest grade in the Immortal Palace. We're basically glorified manual laborers. How could someone like Master Li possibly take an interest in us? Having said that, my spirit body is 70% complete, so perhaps I can pass the next trial and become a ranked disciple. When that time comes, I won't have to waste my time on trivial tasks like this anymore." The second Taoist scoffed as he looked at the jade badge in his hand with a hopeful expression. "What? Your spirit body is already 70% complete. I've only just reached 50%. Looks like I have to work harder in my cultivation. If I can't become a ranked disciple in the next few years, I'm most likely going to be banished to a lower realm," the first Taoist said with a panicked expression. "To be honest, going to a lower realm isn't all that bad. Aside from immortality, you can enjoy everything else," the second Taoist chuckled. "I'm not going to a lower realm. I'm definitely going to become a ranked disciple like you, senior martial brother," the first Taoist said in a determined manner. "In that case, you'll have to work hard, junior martial brother. If you still haven't manifested a spirit body in 5 years, the enforcers of the Immortal Palace aren't going to give you any special treatment," the second Taoist replied in a serious manner. "Thank you for the words of caution, senior martial brother. I'll be sure to work hard," the first Taoist said with a determined nod. Just as the two Taoists were chatting with one another, the huge ice worm up above plunged into the sea of mist before rising even further upward, instantly reaching an altitude of hundreds of thousands of feet. The mist abruptly scattered, and the ice worm emerged into a world that was abundant with spiritual qi. There were hundreds of mountains of different sizes hovering above the sea of mist, the tallest of which stood at hundreds of thousands feet tall, while the shortest were only around 30,000 to 40,000 feet in height. However, all of them were covered in exotic plants and flowers, as well as beautifully crafted buildings. The mountains were connected by rainbow bridges, and there were men and women drifting over the bridges in palatial attire, presenting a scene akin to a heavenly paradise. The blue ice worm immediately flew over several mountains before arriving at the center of the cluster of mountains. Down below was a massive city-like palace that was surrounded by around a dozen mountains. The palace was extremely resplendent with countless huge runes revolving around it, and in front of the massive gate that was over 10,000 feet tall stood a series of armed golden-armored guards. Above the enormous gate was a silver plaque, upon which was inscribed, "Golden Hand Immortal Palace," in giant golden character. As soon as the blue ice worm landed in front of the palace gate, it immediately transformed into a thin and tall Taoist priest with a dark complexion, holding a silver horsetail brush. A few of the golden-armored guards standing in front of the gate immediately approached him, and one of them extended a slight bow as he inquired in a voice that was neither arrogant nor humble, "Why have you visited the Immortal Palace, Master Li?" "I wish to see the palace master," the Taoist priest immediately replied. "I'm not sure that can be arranged. The palace master is currently in seclusion and won't see anyone unless it's for an important reason," the armored guard said with a hesitant expression. The Taoist priest's expression darkened upon hearing this, yet just as he was about to say something, an authoritative voice suddenly rang out. "Let Li Ming come in to see me. I have urgent matters I wish to discuss with him." The armored guard immediately cupped his fist in a salute before stepping away to the side. "Yes, palace master, Please go ahead, Master Li. Chapter 2275, 9 Origin Taoist Temple. The Taoist priest didn't say anything further and headed straight toward the palace gate. He seemed to be very familiar with everything in the palace, and after passing through a massive hall and several long corridors, he arrived in a peaceful courtyard. All types of exotic flowers and plants were growing inside the courtyard, and there were 2 women in palatial dresses standing beside the entrance with silver veils over their faces. The women had skin as fair as jade, and they were very elegant, but their auras were quite ethereal and unfathomable. "Greetings, I've come to pay the palace master a visit," the Taoist priest said as he extended a polite salute toward the 2 women. One of them women stepped gracefully off to the side to avoid his salute and said, "We wouldn't dare to accept your salute, Master Li. Please go in. Our palace master has been waiting for quite some time now." Then I'll be going on ahead," the Taoist priest replied with a smile before entering the courtyard. After passing through a fragrant garden of flowers, a small yet lush meadow appeared up ahead. There were fragrant floral trees planted all around the meadow, and a purple-robed woman was currently standing in front of one of those trees, inspecting it with an appreciative look in her eyes. "I pay my respects to the palace master," the Taoist priest said as he lowered his head in a respectful manner. "There's no one else around, so there's no need to be so stiff and formal. Just refer to me as Martial Ant," the woman said with a faint smile. "I wouldn't dare. We aren't in the 9 Origin Taoist Temple. If a patrolling envoy were to overhear me calling you that, it would be bad for both of us," the Taoist priest replied with a serious expression. "Aren't you being a little too cautious? Having said that, those patrolling envoys really are spoilsports. I can't do anything with them around. I'm beginning to miss the days when I was free from the responsibilities that come with being the palace master. How about I retire and nominate you as my successor?" the woman asked, and even though she wore an amused expression, she gave off an indescribable sense of authority. My grandmaster would never agree to something like that, palace master. Even though the region that our Golden Hand Immortal Palace governs over is inconsequential in the context of the entire immortal region, it is the foundation of our 9 Origin Taoist Temple, and countless immortal citizens reside in this area, so the position of palace master can't just be handed down to anyone, the Taoist priest replied as he shook his head vigorously. "HMPH, you sure know how to flatter me. Your master and all of your martial uncles possess superior powers to mine. Why aren't any of them the palace master? I did become a disciple of your grandmasters later than they did, but I've already stayed in this immortal palace for over 100,000 years. Isn't it time someone relieved me of my duties?" the woman harumphed. "Back when you became a disciple of my grandmaster, you were already the master of a lower realm, so you're the ideal candidate to be the immortal palace master. As for my master and martial uncles, all of them have grown accustomed to having no responsibilities on their shoulders, so there's no way that they would be able to lead the Golden Hand Immortal Palace to greater heights like you could," the Taoist priest said with a fawning smile. "I must admit that your flattery is working. Your masters and martial uncles either have zero sense of responsibility and go into seclusion for tens, even hundreds of thousands of years at a time, or have cultivated to the point where they've become as emotionless as rocks. In particular, I try to stay as far away from your master as possible," the woman said through gritted teeth, as if she had just recalled some kind of unpleasant memory. A wry smile appeared on the Taoist priest's face upon hearing this. Even he was petrified of his own master and didn't dare to utter so much as an extra word in his presence, let alone this martial aunt of his. "By the way, why have you come to see me? You seem to be in quite a hurry. I saw through the all-seeing mirror that you were about to barge your way through if the guards refused to let you in," the woman suddenly said with a faint smile. A serious look immediately appeared on the Taoist priest's face upon hearing this, and he lowered his voice slightly as he replied, "I came here to deliver a report on the task that Grandmaster assigned to me last time." A serious look also appeared on the woman's face, and she replied, "I see. Let's discuss this in my spirit domain." As soon as her voice trailed off, she swiped a finger through the air, and a white spatial rift emerged, then scattered into bursts of white light. The surrounding environment completely transformed in the wake of the white light, and an intricately crafted hall was manifested, complete with tables and chairs, as well as a group of beautiful female servants in palatial dresses standing on either side of the hall. The Taoist priest's expression changed slightly at the sight of the female servant. "I see that you've cultivated your spirit domain to the 3rd spirit form stage, Martial Ant. These domain spirits aren't very intelligent right now, but once developed further, they'll definitely become powerful allies. I only recently progressed from the creation stage to the spirit form stage, so I was in seclusion to consolidate my spirit domain. Of course, if your Grandmaster were willing to come out of seclusion to provide me with some guidance, then that would be even better. Take a seat, Martial Nephew. Even the immortal tools of the patrolling envoys won't be able to encroach upon my spirit domain without my detection. Go ahead and deliver your report, the woman said with a faint smile before taking a seat on the chair at the center of the hall. Please excuse me, the Taoist priest said as he also took a seat. If I recall correctly, you were assigned the task several centuries ago, right? Has an outcome been reached? The woman asked with a serious expression. During these past few centuries, I've tried all types of methods, and only after expending a heavy price was I able to borrow a good friend's treasure to track down that person, the Taoist priest replied. As long as we can track that person down, any price is worth paying. That person betrayed our 9-origin Taoist temple and disappeared with that item. Even though we possess a soul badge of his, he was somehow able to sever that connection. Even your Grandmaster made an exception to try and investigate this matter, only to be stopped by several powerful seniors, thereby rendering his efforts fruitless. His soul badge only registered a response again several centuries ago, and he seems to be in a very bad condition, which is why your Grandmaster assigned this task to you. If that traitor were to perish, then he would naturally deserve that fate, but the item that he stole concerns the future welfare of our 9-origin Taoist temple, so we have to recover it, the woman said as a hint of rage appeared in her eyes. The Taoist priest's heart stirred slightly upon seeing this, and he hurriedly rose to his feet as he extended a respectful bow. Rest assured, Martial Ant, cracks have appeared on that traitor's soul badge, but he most likely won't perish anytime soon. I'm guessing he's been trapped somewhere, but the biggest issue now is that he's not in true immortal realm. Instead, he's in a lower realm. A lower realm? What's so difficult about that? Just find his exact location, then expend some immortal spirit stones and teleport to him through a descending immortal platform. Could it be that the lower realm he fled to is one that we've lost contact with? The woman asked. Indeed, Martial Ant. That traitor fled to a lower realm that we've lost contact with in the Southern Realm cluster, and we haven't been able to track down exactly which lower realm he's in, but we should be able to arrive at a verdict given some time. However, there are hundreds of lower realms in the Southern Realm cluster, and ever since that spatial storm, our true immortal realm has lost control over those realms. To this day, we still haven't been able to recover their exact coordinates, so the descending immortal platforms can't teleport me there. The Taoist priest sighed with furrowed brows. That is indeed quite troublesome. Ever since the coordinates of the southern cluster changed, not only have people from the true immortal realm been unable to access those realms, it's also become extremely difficult for beings from those realms to ascend to our true immortal realm. All those who have been able to ascend to our true immortal realm from those realms in recent times have possessed extraordinary aptitude and potential, the woman said as her eyes narrowed slightly. I'm well aware of that. The vastly renowned immortal Lord Tian Shu ascended from one of those lost realms, and in the span of no more than 1,000,000 years, he forged a resounding reputation for himself and became a subordinate of Imperial Lord Guangfa. The Taoist priest replied with a hint of envy in his eyes. All right, setting that aside for now, without the exact coordinates, it'll be impossible to travel to those lower realms through conventional means. Perhaps I'll have to go to your Grandmaster and see if he has some ideas. With the situation that traitor is currently in, we should be able to capture him with minimal effort. Having said that, I'm rather curious about how he managed to flee into those lost realms, the woman said as a cold look flashed through her eyes. Chapter 2276, Ma Liang. Who knows? Perhaps he plotted this in advance and obtained the exact coordinates of one of the lost realms. Alternatively, perhaps he fled into that lost realm due to some type of mishap. In any case, he was able to take the treasure and escape from our 9-origin Taoist temple far easier than he should have been able to, so he had to have received instructions from someone. Otherwise, he would have never dared to betray our Taoist temple, the Taoist priest said with a contemplative expression. There's nothing to speculate here. The mastermind behind this is most likely one of the people who stepped in to stop your Grandmaster, the woman chuckled coldly. The Taoist priest nodded in response, clearly sharing the same opinion. All right, beings of your Grandmaster's caliber are not for us to discuss. I'm more interested in which disciple we'll be sending to the lower realm if we can track down the exact coordinates. Would you be interested, Martial Nephew Li? The woman asked with a faint smile. Surely you jest, Martial Aunt. I'm nowhere near powerful enough to undertake such an important task. That traitor was considered to be one of the most powerful disciples of his rank in our Taoist temple, and even though it seems like he's in a very bad position, we can't eliminate the possibility that this could be a trick. Even if he really has been trapped in the lower realm, that's still not necessarily a good thing. It indicates that there's an extremely powerful being in that lower realm, and if we send a disciple that's not powerful or crafty enough, then he could fall into the same position as that traitor, the Taoist priest said with a shake of his head. In that case, our choices will be limited to the disciples who often through the foreign realms. Martial Nephew Zhu and Martial Nephew Wu both seem to be quite suited for the task, the woman said with a smile. Letter 1D5F3, letter 1D69B, letter 1D68T, letter 1D68E, letter 1D604, letter 1D556, letter 1D5F0, letter 1D560, letter 1D46. Senior Martial Brother Zhu and Junior Martial Brother Wu are indeed great candidates, but they're somewhat lacking compared to someone else, the Taoist priest said as a peculiar look appeared in his eyes. The woman faltered slightly upon hearing this. You don't mean? You may not be aware of this yet, but Senior Martial Brother Maz has already come out of his forced seclusion, the Taoist priest said. The woman's smile completely faded upon hearing this. What? When did Ma Liang's punishment conclude? Why haven't I heard anything about this? I was only made aware of this by a junior martial brother a few days ago, and there aren't that many people who know about this. With Senior Martial Brother Ma's powers and cunning nature, there's a very good chance that he'll be assigned this important task, the Taoist priest said with a solemn expression. HMPH, I wouldn't be too sure of that. Ma Liang is indeed quite powerful, but he's far too ruthless. In the past, he sacrificed hundreds of millions of living beings in a lower realm just to refine a treasure, causing immense trouble for our Taoist temple. If it weren't for his exceptional aptitude, and the fact that he had made several major contributions to our Taoist temple in the past, his punishment wouldn't have been limited to only 10,000 years of forced seclusion. If we send him to a lost realm where no one can interfere with his actions, he's most likely going to stir up even more trouble, the woman harumphed coldly. That's all true, but don't forget just how important that treasure is to our Taoist temple and to my grandmaster. Taking that into consideration, I think there's a very good chance that Senior Martial Brother Ma will be chosen, the Taoist priest countered. That is indeed quite a strong possibility. If Ma Liang is sent to the lower realm, his powers will be restricted, but he should still be more than capable of recovering that treasure. So be it, it's not like our opinion carries any weight in this matter anyway. You're just an enforcing disciple, while I'm only an in-name palace master. However, regardless of who gets assigned this task, don't forget to inform me if you find any concrete information about the realm that the traitor is currently situated in, the woman said. I'll be sure to do so, the Taoist priest replied in a respectful manner. Is there anything else you'd like to discuss with me? If not, then I'm going back to rest now, the woman said. That's all for today. I'll be taking my leave now, Martial Aunt, the Taoist priest replied as he rose to his feet and extended a parting salute. The woman merely nodded in response, seemingly having lost interest in further conversation. Thus, the Taoist priest departed, and as soon as he set foot outside the courtyard, he vanished amid a burst of spatial fluctuations. In the next instant, the Taoist priest appeared on a meadow that was surrounded by the same floral trees, but the palace and the purple-robed woman were nowhere to be seen. After taking a quick glance at his surroundings, the Taoist priest immediately returned the same way he had come. A short while later, the blue ice worm rose up into the air in front of the giant palace gate again, then quickly disappeared into the distance. Meanwhile, the purple-robed woman was still seated on her chair in the mysterious hall with a contemplative look on her face, and only after a long while did she murmur to herself with a cold smile, "Ma Liang, hee, that's not a bad arrangement." Her voice then gradually became inaudible, and she abruptly vanished amid a flash of spiritual light. In a restricted area on Concealed Spirit Mountain, Han Li, Mo Jianli, the spirit monarch, Zhu Ran, and Hai Lin were standing in front of a massive formation. The formation was around an acre in size, and not only was it riddled with golden and silver spirit patterns, there were hundreds of top-grade spirit stones embedded into the corners of the formation. The 8-body integration stage spirit beings were standing some distance behind them in a respectful manner, while Han Li and the others were silently inspecting the giant formation. Meanwhile, the spirit monarch was looking up into the sky while holding a formation plate, seemingly calculating something. "The time has come. This is the best time to set off," the spirit monarch suddenly said. "All right, we'll be going on ahead then," Mojangli said as he strode toward the formation, followed closely by Han Li. However, the spirit monarch suddenly cautioned, "You've already decided your return coordinates, and you can return to the spirit realm by crushing your Usra hearts. However, take care not to completely exhaust the energy within your Usra hearts. Otherwise, you could be trapped in the small Usra realm forever." "Thank you for the words of caution. I'll be sure to remember that," Mojangli replied with a smile as he entered the formation. Han Li also cupped his fist in a salute toward the spirit monarch to express his gratitude. Zhu Ran and Hai Lin also strode into the formation, following which the former suddenly turned to the spirit monarch and asked, "Brother spirit, you're not going to suddenly change your mind if we manage to return with threads of time, are you?" Rather than being enraged by Zhu Ran's suspicions, the spirit monarch calmly replied, "Rest assured, Brother Zhu, those threads of time are extremely important to me, so there's no way I'll go back on my word." "That's all I needed to hear," Zhu Ran said as he nodded with a pleased expression. The spirit monarch didn't hesitate any longer as he raised the formation plate in his hand, which released a beam of white light that vanished into the formation in a flash. The giant formation immediately began to emit a loud buzzing sound, and bursts of golden and silver light erupted forth, while countless runes surged out of the top-grade spirit stones in a frenzy. All of a sudden, Han Li and the others vanished from within the formation. The spirit monarch had been appraising the formation with an unblinking gaze this entire time, and only after everyone had disappeared did he heave a sigh of relief. He then turned to the 8 holy spirits behind him and instructed, "Listen up. From now on, keep a constant eye on this formation in shifts, and make sure to inform me right away if any abnormalities arise." "Yes, Spirit Monarch," the 8 body integration stage spirit beings answered in unison. The Spirit Monarch nodded, then flew away as a streak of white light. After a brief discussion, 8 of the 6 holy spirits departed, leaving only the bald man and another body integration stage spirit being behind. The 2 of them immediately sat down on the spot and closed their eyes, then released their enormous spiritual sense to encompass the entire formation. Under these circumstances, they would instantly be alerted if anything were to go wrong with the giant formation. After a short while, the 2 holy spirits entered a state of meditation. Han Li shook his head to rid himself of the onset of dizziness that he had just been struck by. It had been a very long time since he had experienced this type of teleportation discomfort. However, due to the fact that this was teleportation between realms, discomfort was unavoidable even with his immense powers. After recovering from the rush of dizziness, Han Li immediately inspected his surroundings to find that the entire area was filled with thick white trees, short shrubs, and wild grass. However, all of the branches and leaves of the trees were looking rather withered. Mojangli, Zhu Ran, and Hai Lin were nowhere to be seen, but Han Li wasn't surprised at all to see this. He and Mojangli had already anticipated this and made some arrangements. As such, he immediately cast his gaze upward, and his expression quickly changed in response to what he saw. Chapter 2277, Bat Swarm. There were 3 green suns up in the sky, one of which was larger than the other 2. The largest of the 3 suns was at the direct center of the sky, while the 2 smaller suns were situated to the east and to the west, and they were far inferior to the central both in size and radiance. However, what caught Han Li's attention and made him quite wary were the balls of crimson light around the 3 green suns. The balls of light were hovering around the green suns in a still manner, striking one with a sense of captivation when looked at from afar. After staring at these balls of red light for a long while, Han Li suddenly caught a whiff of a honey-like scent. His brows furrowed slightly as he swept a sleeve through the air without any warning, and a streak of azure light that was over 100 feet in length shot forth before quickly vanishing into the dense forest. In the next instant, an earth-shattering roar rang out, and the ground tremored violently before everything fell silent again. Han Li stood on the spot and cast his gaze toward the direction that the roar had come from. Moments later, the streak of azure light re-emerged from the forest before returning up his sleeve. Only then did Han Li fly toward that direction. A distance of several tens of kilometers was covered by Han Li in a flash, and he caught sight of a gargantuan creature that was several thousand feet in length lying amid a cluster of felled trees. The giant creature resembled a beast-insect hybrid, and even though its body had been sliced into several segments, one could still make out cicada wings and feelers typically found on demonic insects, as well as fur and sharp claws that were only found on beasts. From a distance, the creature appeared to be a mix between a giant hornet and a rhinoceros. The same honey-like aroma was being released by its massive body, and at such close quarters, the scent was even more pronounced. Hanli swept his gaze through the surrounding area, to find that all of the plants nearby were wilting at a rapid rate discernible to the naked eye, and they quickly turned completely withered and yellow. Round the carcass of the massive beast was a series of black watermelon-sized insects that resembled praying mantises, and they were clearly long dead. This thing's poison sure is quite potent. The average person could be killed just by catching a whiff of it from hundreds of kilometers away, Hanli murmured to himself. He was unable to determine exactly what this beast was, so it was most likely unique to the small Usra realm. With that in mind, Hanli flicked a finger through the air, releasing a silver fire bead that landed on the massive carcass in a flash. Scorching silver flames instantly erupted forth to engulf and incinerate the carcass into nothingness. After that, Hanli flipped a hand over in an unhurried manner to produce a white egg-sized crystal ball, but his brows immediately furrowed slightly as he cast his gaze toward the crystal ball. Nothing was registering on its surface, so it was clear that it was unable to sense Mojangli as he was too far away. In that case, there was no need for them to be in a hurry to meet up. They could search for their own opportunities in this foreign realm instead. After all, a span of half a month was not a very long time. Having made his decision, Hanli decided on a certain direction before flying away as a streak of azure light. However, he wasn't flying very quickly, and he was only at an altitude of several thousand feet. He had come to the small Usra realm to find treasures, so he didn't want to miss anything. During his flight, he released his enormous spiritual sense to encompass an area with a radius of around 2,000 kilometers down below. With his enormous spiritual sense, he would be able to easily increase his sensory scope to a radius of close to 10,000 kilometers, but he was trying to focus on minute details and even direct his spiritual sense several thousand feet into the ground, so he could only drastically decrease his sensory range. After all, most powerful spiders like to live deep underground. Even so, it was still a testament to Hanli's incredibly powerful spiritual sense that he was able to cover such a large area while paying such close attention to detail. If Mojangli or Zhu Ran were in his place, they would struggle to even achieve half of his sensory range. This was why he was so confident about this trip, even though he didn't have any bloodline sensory abilities that could help him seek out Usra spiders. As for Mojangli, he also seemed to be quite confident, so he most likely had some type of special method to find Usra spiders as well. Thus, Hanli gradually flew away into the distance. Elsewhere, Mojangli was in the process of making a grabbing motion to return a translucent jade sword into his own grasp. There was a pile of rubble just over 1,000 feet ahead of him, atop which sat the dismembered bodies of several creatures with tiger bodies and scorpion stingers. Mojangli took an indifferent glance at these carcasses before stowing his jade sword away, then opened his mouth to expel a ball of purple light. Within the ball of light was a small purple flag that was several inches tall. Mojangli pointed a finger toward the small flag, then uttered the word rise. The small flag immediately began to expand at a rapid rate, surging to around 10 feet tall in the blink of an eye. In its miniature form, the flag didn't appear to be all that remarkable, but at this size, it was revealed to be a purple flag with a golden shaft, and on the surface of the flag were countless runes, as well as the image of a two-headed silver spider at its very center. Mojangli began to chant something while flicking a series of incantation seals through the air, all of which vanished into the flag in a flash, and the silver spider image on the flag gradually became clearer and clearer. A smile appeared on Mojangli's face upon seeing this. Even though he didn't possess a bloodline that was related to the Usra spider, this coiling silk flag that he had obtained by chance had the soul of a silver astral spider as its artifact spirit, which meant that it could detect powerful spiders within a certain range. The effect was still inferior to Zhu Ran and Hai Lin's bloodline detection, but it shouldn't be inferior by much. Having said that, if Usra spiders really were as fearsome as the rumors suggested, it would most likely be very difficult for him to kill one even if he could track one down. Mojangly continued to cast incantation seals as these thoughts ran through his mind, and all of a sudden, the silver spider image on the flag abruptly disintegrated into specks of spiritual light. "Looks like there's nothing here. I'll have to search elsewhere," Mojangly murmured to himself, but he wasn't disappointed by this. He had only just been teleported into the small Usra realm, and he wasn't expecting to track down an Usra spider so quickly anyway. Thus, Mojangly swept a sleeve toward the flag, and it quickly reverted back to its original size before being swallowed by Mojangly. Immediately thereafter, he rose up into the air and flew away as a streak of light. "Looks like we're in luck. We've only just been teleported into this realm, and our bloodlines have already sensed something. We should be in for a fruitful trip," Hylin said with an excited expression as he flew over 1,000 feet beneath the ground. In contrast, Zuran wore a calm expression and replied, "Don't celebrate too early. Our bloodlines are reacting to something, but it could be another type of spider. I've heard that there were many species of spiders in the Usra realm." "I'm naturally aware of that, but there's still a chance, isn't there?" Hylin refused to have his enthusiasm dashed. Zuran merely smiled and remained silent. Moments later, the two of them emerged from the soil and arrived in an inky black cave. A short while after that, the two hovered side by side several feet above the ground with a pool of black blood beneath them. Lying within the pool of blood were 4 green spiders with sharp spikes all over their bodies. "You were right, they were Usra spiders after all," Hylin said with a wry smile. "That's no surprise. The small Usra realm isn't a huge place, but the chances of finding Usra spiders as soon as we enter the realm are still quite low. We can obtain a few decent materials here, so our effort wasn't a complete waste," Zuran replied in a calm voice as he made a grabbing motion with one hand. 2 yellow stones immediately flew out of the soil before landing in his grasp. "At least we ended up with something. We don't have a lot of time, so let's get out of here," Hylin said. Zuran naturally had no reason to object, and thus they flew up into the soil overhead as a pair of streaks of light. And Lee hovered expressionlessly above a small mountain, facing a colony of crimson bats. Each bat was around the size of a human head, and their wingspans stretched to about 7 to 8 feet. At the center of this colony of bats was a giant bat that was several times larger than all of its brethren. Not only did this giant bat have faint golden patterns all over its body, there was a third crimson demonic eye on its forehead. The bat was currently staring at Han Li with a hint of bewilderment in its 3 eyes. Han Li merely hovered in midair with his hands clasped behind his back, paying the colony of bats no heed at all as he quickly scanned through the surrounding area with his spiritual sense. As time passed, the bewilderment on the giant bat's face gradually gave way to bloodthirst. A short while later, it was finally unable to hold back any longer, and it opened its mouth to release a burst of ultrasonic sound waves. All of the surrounding crimson bats were immediately stirred up into a frenzy, and they also opened their mouths to release ultrasonic sound waves, which converged to form a massive invisible wave that surged directly toward Han Li. Chapter 2278, Fish Monsters. Only then did Han Li take a glance at the colony of bats, and he extended a palm out of his sleeve before thrusting it nonchalantly through the air. A dull thump rang out as all of the world's origin chi within a radius of hundreds of kilometers shuddered violently. Letter 1D6ATF, letter 1D563, letter 1D41E, letter 1D5F2, letter 1D430, letter 1D556, letter 1D41C, letter 1D698, letter 1D5FA. Countless rays of 5-colored light began to appear, then converged in a frenzy to form a mountainous 5-colored palm that came crashing down toward the bat colony with devastating force. In the face of the giant palm's enormous power, all of the crimson bats had begun exploding into clouds of blood mist even before the palm had fallen directly upon them. As for their collective sound waves, it had been instantly reduced to nothingness by this tremendous force. The giant bat let loose an alarmed roar as the golden patterns on its body lit up, then erupted out of its body to form a golden light barrier that shielded it from all directions. In the face of the enormous pressure, the golden light barrier tremored violently, while the giant bat was pressed flat onto the ground and completely immobilized. "That's quite an interesting innate protective ability. Unfortunately, it's still too weak. Otherwise, I could have considered taking it as a spirit beast," Han Li murmured to himself with a slightly wistful expression. He then pointed a finger toward the giant 5-colored palm, and it instantly swelled drastically in size, crushing the golden light barrier, and the giant bat before it even had a chance to cry out. Hanli swept a sleeve through the air, and the giant five-colored palm instantly vanished, but there were still some golden runes lingering where the giant bat had just been before. Hanli's eyes narrowed slightly as he waved a hand toward the runes, releasing a burst of suction force that drew all of the runes into his grasp. Hanli glanced at the golden runes before rubbing them between his hands, and golden light flashed erratically as the sound of metal grating on metal rang out. As Hanli brought his hands apart again, a golden beasthide was revealed. Those golden runes were none other than those golden patterns that had been on the giant bat's body. This thing can be refined into a decent protective treasure, so it looks like this wasn't a complete waste of time, Hanli murmured to himself before flipping a hand over to stow the beasthide away. Immediately thereafter, his expression changed slightly as if he had sensed something, and blue light flashed within his eyes, upon which he caught sight of a massive flock of unidentifiable birds flying toward him from several hundred kilometers away. These were a series of giant eagle-like birds, each with 2 pairs of wings and a single horn on their heads, and all of them wore bloodthirsty expressions. Hanli's brows furrowed slightly as he withdrew his gaze, and after taking a final glance at the vast expanse of blood mist that was still lingering beneath the mountain, he shook his head before flying away as a streak of azure light. That flock of birds posed no threat to him, but he had no intention of dealing with all of the beasts that were attracted to this place by the blood of those crimson bats. After all, his main objective was to track down Usura spiders. 2 days flew by in the blink of an eye, and during this time, Hanli didn't reap any rewards aside from killing several powerful-looking beasts and discovering some rare materials. Aside from 2 poisonous herbs that he didn't know the name of, the other items were all quite valuable, but they weren't of much use to him at his current cultivation base, so he would just have to give them to his disciples. However, on the 3rd day, Hanli finally discovered some things related to Usura spiders in a black valley. He was currently standing inside an obscure beast lair in the valley, within which were several bear-human hybrid beasts, all of which were lying on a straw-matted ground in a completely still manner. Their fur was completely snowy white, and their flesh had completely withered away, but there weren't any wounds on their bodies. It was as if all of them had died naturally from old age. Hanli observed these carcasses for a short while, then swept a sleeve through the air to release several fiery snakes that instantly incinerated the bodies into ashes. Even though the carcasses had been incinerated, there were still some translucent threads left on the ground. Hanli made a grabbing motion to draw the translucent threads into his grasp, then enveloped them in balls of azure light. He then swept his spiritual sense toward them, and his expression immediately changed slightly. He extended a hand into the azure stroke, then stroked one of the translucent threads with a finger. All of a sudden, the translucent thread transformed into a layer of blue light that quickly spread up his entire arm. The flesh on his arm that was enshrouded within the blue light began to rapidly wither away at a rate that was discernible to the naked eye, and an aged aura began to emanate from the affected limb. Hanli's expression darkened slightly as he instantly withdrew his finger from the translucent thread, following which a burst of golden light flowed along his arm to eradicate the spreading blue light. Azure light then flowed over his arm, and it instantly returned to its former supple state, as if the sight of it withering away had been nothing more than an illusion. That was the power of time. It can't be referred to as the true law of time, but it's still an extremely rare innate ability. Looks like there are Usura spiders prowling in this area, Hanli murmured to himself as a hint of excitement appeared in his eyes. Immediately thereafter, the translucent threads in his grasp vanished amid a flash of azure light. These things didn't pose a threat to him, but they definitely shouldn't be left out in the open. After that, Hanli flew out of the beast lair and began to carefully search through the area around the valley. However, he returned to the valley several hours later with a dark expression, clearly having just gone on a futile search. Hanli hovered in the air above the valley for a while with a contemplative expression. All of a sudden, a thought seemed to have occurred to him, and he made a hand seal before releasing his spiritual sense downward, directing it tens of thousands of feet deep into the ground. A short while later, a hint of elation appeared on his face, and he immediately flew toward another direction as a streak of azure light. Shortly thereafter, Hanli appeared above a lake not far away, and he cast his gaze downward before descending from above. He then plunged into the lake, and moments later, Countless arcs of golden lightning erupted within the lake amid a rumbling thunderclap. Countless fish of different descriptions began to rise up to the surface with their bellies facing the sky, and all of them had been completely charred black. After that, the lake fell completely silent, as if it were a dead lake. At this point, Han Li was situated in a crude passageway tens of thousands of feet underground that could only fit one person at a time, and there were uneven azure stone blocks all around him. The passageway was quite lopsided, and it led deeper into the ground. This was a suspicious place that Han Li had discovered by chance, using his spiritual sense. The entire passageway was lined with these azure stone blocks, and even with Han Li's enormous spiritual sense, his sensory range was severely restricted, so it was clear that these stone blocks weren't ordinary materials. This was what had drawn Han Li's suspicion in the first place. However, after discovering another translucent thread as he traveled along the passageway, Han Li knew that he was on the right track and immediately accelerated. After delving close to 100,000 feet into the ground, scorching heat waves began to surge toward him from down below. The temperature here was so high that an ordinary being would most likely instantly be reduced to a dried corpse. However, Han Li completely disregarded the heat, keeping it out with a layer of faint azure light. After rounding a few corners, a flashing red light became visible up ahead, and the sound of conversation could also be heard. Han Li's eyes narrowed slightly, and specks of spiritual light suddenly emerged all over his body, following which he became completely blurry and indistinct. After passing through a crimson wave of fire, Han Li emerged stealthily from the passageway and arrived above an underground lava lake. The lake was filled with scorching lava, and thick pillars of flames were occasionally erupting upward from its surface, striking the exit of the passageway, causing the stones there to be extremely smooth and crimson in color. There was a series of translucent fiery red crystals floating within the lava, and Han Li swept his spiritual sense toward the crystals to discover that these were extremely rare top-grade fire spirit stones. In fact, the fire spiritual chi imbued within these stones was even more potent than that of the average top-grade fire spirit stone in the spirit realm. However, none of that attracted Han Li's attention. He was currently appraising a woman and a group of demonic creatures at the edge of the lava lake. These demonic creatures had human upper bodies paired with lower bodies of fish, and each of them had 4 arms. The male creatures had golden bands around their arms, while the women had silver ribbons in their hair, and they were either empty-handed or wielding short crimson halberds. Not far in front of these creatures stood a woman who appeared to be around 21 to 22 years of age, appraising the creatures before her with a calm expression. Chapter 2279, Tracking. The woman had an elegant figure and was wearing a short green dress. Her facial features were particularly seductive, and her bare arms were as fair and delicate as the flesh of lotus roots. There were several arrow-shaped objects embedded into her arms, and she was appraising the group of creatures before her with a hint of a smile on her face. The fish demons were all hovering around 10 feet above the ground, and even though they were far more imposing than the woman and letting loose strings of low snarls, all of them wore fearful expressions. "Are you going to hand over your 2 brethren, or are you going to force me to take them? If it weren't for the fact that you're still somewhat useful, all of you would have been killed long ago," the woman said in a chilling voice. There was a tall male fish demon who seemed to be less fearful of the woman than his companions, and he stuttered, "Never, we'll never hand over our brethren." A hint of surprise appeared on Han Li's face as he listened to this conversation from above. The 2 of them were speaking in an ancient language, recorded in a tome that he had seen in the spirit realm in the past, and this was a pleasant surprise for him. The woman's expression darkened upon hearing this, and she harumphed coldly, "HMPH, how impudent. I've only just had a meal, so I didn't want to hunt again, but if you insist on resisting, I wouldn't mind adding another course to my meal." A furious look appeared in the eyes of the male fish demon, and he let loose a loud roar, upon which the entire group of fish demons descended onto the surface of the lava lake down below before raising their weapons or flailing their arms in a frenzy. The lava within the lake surged violently, and streaks of scorching red light erupted from it before surging into the fish demons' bodies. The fish demons immediately swelled drastically to several tens of feet in length, and most of them were giving off deity transformation stage auras, while the male fish demon that was leading the group seemed to have reached the early spatial tempering stage. "Looks like you've forgotten the trauma from last time. Is there anything else you can resort to aside from this paltry flame bathing technique? So be it, let me teach you all another lesson. The woman chuckled as her body blurred, and all of a sudden, she appeared right at the center of the group of fish demons. Countless translucent threads then erupted out of her body at an incredible speed, and many of the fish demons were instantly felled in unison. The dense-looking protective red light around their bodies was completely unable to resist the translucent threads. The woman cast her gaze down toward the immobilized fish demons below her, and a sinister smile that belied her beautiful features appeared on her face. She reached out and made a grabbing motion toward a pair of female fish demons, and a burst of enormous invisible force toward the two fish demons, hearts out of their chests before shooting directly toward the woman. The woman then opened her mouth to release two translucent threads, which pierced through the pair of hearts in a flash before delivering them into her mouth. This flavor really doesn't get old no matter how many times I've had it. It's a pity that you space fish beings have some pitiful reproductive abilities. In order to avoid unnecessary waste, I'll use those two as sacrifices. Having said that, even though I'm letting the rest of you live, I can't let you go without some punishment. The woman was savoring her meal with a smile on her face, but her voice was becoming more and more menacing. All of a sudden, she opened her mouth to release a ball of blue light, then plunged a hand directly into it before pulling out a long blue whip that was riddled with extremely sharp hook spikes. A vicious look then appeared on her face as she lashed out with her whip, unleashing countless whip projections that hurtled directly toward the fish demons. The whip seemed to have been refined from some type of material that specifically repressed these fish demons, as evidenced by the fact that it was able to easily tear through their protective spiritual light before leaving deep gashes in their flesh. A string of roars and groans rang out above the lava lake, and the male fish demon that was the leader of the group received the most whip lashes. Initially, he was still able to glower at the woman with an enraged expression, but after a while, he was only able to tremble incessantly as he threw his arms over his own head to protect himself, and there was not a single inch of his skin that was left unharmed. Only then did the woman withdraw her whip as she giggled. Hopefully you'll remember this lesson for a while. If you know what's good for you, then produce more offspring. Some of you will still be used as sacrifices, but your population will still increase, and our queen will be very pleased to see that. She might even reward you for your efforts. If your population hasn't increased by the time I pay you my next visit, then you won't be getting away with just a lashing. After delivering those threats, the woman opened her mouth again to release what appeared to be a white bubble, which swelled in size before encompassing the carcasses of the two female fish demons. She pointed a finger at the bubble, and the bubble shrank down to a tiny size along with the two carcasses within it before flying back into the woman's mouth. After that, she departed as a ball of white light, while the other fish demons could only look on with fierce resentment in their eyes. A short while later, the fish demons helped one another to their feet with disheartened expressions, and after a brief discussion, all of them plunged into the lava lake. Thus, peace and quiet returned, but it only lasted for a few moments before a blurry figure emerged amid a burst of spatial fluctuation. Hanli had witnessed everything that had just taken place here, and he murmured to himself with an intrigued expression, "How interesting." According to historical records, the space fish race appeared in ancient times for a brief period, and they should be completely extinct in all realms. I didn't think there would be a branch of them left here in the small Usra realm. These space fish beings seem to possess some type of extremely powerful ability, which is why they were hunted down to extinction, but not many people know exactly what type of ability it is that they possess. After that, Hanli cast his gaze toward the direction that the woman had just disappeared in with a perplexed expression. That woman seems to be an Usra spider, but she's only at the late spatial tempering stage. Shouldn't Usra spiders only be able to attain human forms after reaching maturity? That's rather strange. Hanli stroked his own chin with a contemplative expression, and only after a long while did he shake his head as he murmured to himself, "I'll think about this another time. For now, I should focus on following that woman back to the lair of the Usra spiders. Having said that, I can't just leave these space fish beings behind." Hanli suddenly swept a sleeve through the air as he spoke, releasing a ball of golden light which instantly transformed into a miniature purplish golden figure that was around half a foot tall. The figure had no nose or mouth, and its eyes were completely cold and expressionless. "Keep those space fish beings safe until I get back," he instructed. The purplish golden figure nodded before plunging down into the lava lake as a streak of golden light. The purplish golden figure was none other than the gold-devouring beetle monarch. Due to the leopard Kirin beast's lackluster cultivation base, it had gone into seclusion to cultivate on the Holy Island and hadn't accompanied Han Li on this trip. After that, Han Li's body became blurry and indistinct once again as he departed. With Han Li's current abilities, it was naturally very simple for him to leave a spiritual sense mark on that woman, so he wasn't afraid of losing track of her anytime soon. Thus, it only took him a short while to catch up to her. At this point, Han Li's body had turned completely invisible, and the woman was completely oblivious to his presence, even though he was no more than 10 kilometers behind her. After that, Han Li witnessed the woman slay a spatial tempering stage giant black boar-like beast in a swamp, then collected around a dozen golden fruits from a rather obscure valley before continuing onward without pause. Han Li followed stealthily behind her this entire time. Even if this woman really were an Asura spider, there was no way she was powerful enough for her demon core to be able to produce threads of time. From the very beginning, his target had been set on the mature Asura spiders. Otherwise, he would have already attacked the woman back at the lava lake. Han Li's eyes gradually lit up as a massive mountain range began to appear in the distance. The woman had slowed down significantly and was also beginning to descend at the edge of the mountain range. All of a sudden, a burst of loud rumbling rang out from deep within the mountain range, following which 7 or 8 massive birds flew out and reached the woman in a flash. They then descended around her in an affectionate manner before accompanying her in her flight toward the mountain range. At the same time, an extremely fearsome burst of spiritual sense erupted out of the mountain range, quickly scanning through the entire area and passing virtually right by Han Li. Chapter 2280, Battle of Spiritual Sense. There's a grand ascension stage being up ahead. Han Li's heart jolted as he immediately stopped on the spot. Only after scanning through the nearby area several times was that burst of formidable spiritual sense withdrawn. After that, peace and quiet returned to the area. An ordinary mature Asura spider definitely can't release spiritual sense of that caliber. Could it be that there really is an Asura spider here more powerful than the average grand ascension stage being? If so, then if I get any closer than this, I won't be able to conceal myself from their spiritual sense using normal concealment secret techniques. However, the fact that their spiritual sense could be released this far without waning in the slightest indicates that they're using some type of enhancement treasure. Han Li murmured to himself as a grim look appeared on his face. If this Asura spider really were comparable in power to a true spirit being, then even he would be ill-advised to take it lightly. After contemplating the situation for a long while, he finally made a decision. He flipped a hand over to summon a purple talisman, which immediately exploded into a cloud of purple mist that enveloped his entire body, and once the mist scattered, he was nowhere to be seen. As a safety precaution, Han Li had used his high zenith invisibility talisman once again. Now that he had attained an insubstantial form, he was able to drift deeper into the mountain range without any inhibitions. Even though he was unable to travel at his full speed in his current form, he was still able to quickly make his way into the mountain range. At this point, he was already quite far away from the young woman, but through the spiritual sense mark he had planted on her, he was still able to clearly sense her exact location. Thus, Han Li wasn't in a rush to catch up to her and merely continued onward in an unhurried manner. Letter 1D453, letter 1D4C7, letter 1D626, letter 212F, letter 1D638, letter 1D626. Letter 1D450, letter 1D45C, letter 1D4C2. However, after venturing close to 10,000 kilometers into the mountain range, his brows began to furrow slightly. He had thought that due to the presence of the Asura spider lair here, there would definitely be very few other beasts here, and at the very least, there wouldn't be any particularly powerful ones. However, in the scope covered by his spiritual sense alone, he had already discovered several tens of deity transformation and spatial tempering stage beasts, as well as 2 body integration stage birds. One of the 2 birds was crimson in color and was as massive as a cow, while the other was covered in steely gray feathers with a hideous fleshy lump on its head. The 2 of them were perched on the branch of a giant tree several hundred kilometers away from Han Li, and one of them was constantly looking around, while the other seemed to have fallen asleep. As for the other beasts in the area, all of them human-beast hybrids, and they were patrolling the area in several groups. The beasts of the small Asura realm seemed to have all been conscripted by the Asura spiders, and that was quite remarkable to Han Li. The spirit monarch had never mentioned that Usra spiders had the habit of recruiting other beasts. It seemed that either the spirit monarch had underestimated the intelligence of these Usra spiders, or something had to have happened in the small Usra realm to result in this scenario. The fact that even a spatial tempering stage Usra spider was able to manifest a human form made Han Li lean more toward the latter option. With that in mind, Han Li became rather wary of the Usra spiders up ahead, but he still followed along behind the young woman without pause. After a while, Han Li had covered a distance of hundreds of thousands of kilometers, and he finally caught sight of an azure stone city in the distance on a plain that was situated in the middle of a cluster of mountains. The city was entirely constructed from massive azure stone blocks with walls that were thousands of feet tall, but it only covered a radius of several tens of kilometers, so it was more like a stronghold. Aside from some stone beastly statues, there wasn't anything else standing atop the city wall. What was even more peculiar was that the city didn't appear to have any gates, so it was completely isolated within the massive city wall. Blue light flashed within Han Li's eyes as he examined the stone city without using his spiritual sense, but right as his gaze was about to pierce through the city wall, countless white runes suddenly appeared in his field of view, transforming into a series of white lotus flowers that obstructed his gaze. That's the mystical white lotus restriction. How could it have been set up here? Han Li exclaimed as a stunned look appeared on his face. This restriction was one that was unique to a certain major race in the spirit realm, and it was capable of keeping out even the spiritual sense of grand ascension stage beings. How were the Usra spiders capable of setting up such a restriction? Before Han Li had a chance to ponder this notion any further, a wisp of spiritual sense within his mind abruptly jolted, and his expression immediately darkened. Almost at the exact same moment, an earth-shattering boom rang out from within the stone city, following which a mountainous crimson spider projection emerged in the sky. The spider projection cast a cold and forbidding gaze throughout the surrounding area, and the same formidable spiritual sense that had appeared at the edge of the mountain range immediately swept over the entire landscape. Despite how powerful this burst of spiritual sense was, it was unable to detect Han Li in his insubstantial form, and it could only return to the giant spider projection's body in the end. A hint of fury appeared on the spider projection's face following its failed search, and a bone-chilling harumph rang out, followed by a coarse female voice. Which fellow Taoist has come to visit my heavenly spider city, and why have you planted a spiritual sense mark on my junior? Why don't you come into the city to meet me? The voice echoed several times, and it was audible throughout the majority of the mountain range. All of the beasts aside from the ones that were subsidiaries to the Usra spiders immediately bowed down onto the ground while trembling incessantly, but the voice was met by complete silence. It looks like you're very confident in your concealment technique and are determined to hide. In that case, I'll be waiting for you in my city. The female voice had spiked up a few octaves from fury, and immediately thereafter, the giant spider projection in the sky disintegrated amid a burst of violent energy fluctuations. At this moment, Han Li was situated hundreds of kilometers away from the stone city with his eyes slightly narrowed, and all of a sudden, he released his enormous spiritual sense toward the city without hiding it any longer. A massive white lotus flower projection immediately emerged from the city to clash with his spiritual sense. A dull rumbling boom rang out, and the white lotus flower immediately began to warp in the face of Han Li's overwhelming spiritual sense, then abruptly exploded on the spot. Han Li had released as close to 70% of all of his spiritual sense, which was comparable to the combined spiritual sense of 3 to 4 ordinary Grand Ascension stage beings. The mystical white lotus projection was vastly renowned in the spirit realm, but there was no way it could resist his overbearing spiritual sense. If his spiritual sense were allowed to descend upon the stone city, all of the living beings within the city that were below the Grand Ascension stage would most likely have their souls immediately explode. How dare you? The same coarse female voice rang out within the stone city again, and the spiritual sense of the voice's owner also erupted forth to clash with Han Li's spiritual sense. A string of deafening booms immediately rang out above the stone city alongside bursts of violent energy fluctuations that threatened to shatter this entire space. The owner of the female voice was no ordinary Grand Ascension stage being, but her spiritual sense naturally couldn't compare with that of Han Li, and after just a few clashes, she was quickly forced onto the back foot. The woman was quite alarmed to see this, and she hurriedly yelled, "Hurry up! What are you waiting for?" Han Li's pupils immediately contracted upon hearing this. Almost at the exact same moment, a man harumphed coldly within the stone city, and another burst of powerful spiritual sense rose up before combining as one with the woman's spiritual sense to contend with Han Li. Han Li's expression changed slightly after just a brief clash with the man's spiritual sense. This is no ordinary Grand Ascension stage being either. However, he quickly discovered that the two of them were only just barely able to withstand his spiritual sense, and a cold look flashed through his eyes as he increased his spiritual sense output to 90%. Another earth-shattering boom rang out, and the man and woman in the stone city were completely bewildered, as even their combined spiritual sense was gradually being forced onto the back foot. How could anyone possess such powerful spiritual sense? Who exactly was this person? A hint of fear began to well up in both of their hearts. Han Li continued to look on at the city with a cold expression. Yet just as he was considering whether he should release the final 10% of his spiritual sense to crush the two beings in the city, several more bursts of spiritual sense that were comparable to those of normal Grand Ascension stage beings erupted out of the city before hurtling directly toward Han Li. Chapter 2281, Secret. Han Li's expression changed slightly upon sensing this, before giving a cold harumph as he began to withdraw his own spiritual sense. The man and woman in the city immediately seized this opportunity to launch a counterattack with their spiritual sense, and in the blink of an eye, 3 bursts of powerful spiritual sense had appeared above Han Li, with 3 slightly weaker bursts trailing along in hot pursuit. Letter 1D557, letter 1D42B, letter 1D41E, letter 1D556, letter 1D568, letter 1D41E. Letter 1D41C, letter 1D5FC, letter 1D696. Han Li's eyes narrowed slightly upon seeing this, and he let loose another cold harumph. His voice wasn't very loud, but it immediately triggered a burst of violent energy fluctuations, forcing the man and the woman to make a hurried retreat with their spiritual sense. At this moment, a cold look appeared in Han Li's eyes, and instead of taking advantage of this opportunity to withdraw his spiritual sense back into his own body, he manifested a giant translucent blade with his spiritual sense before lashing out at the man's spiritual sense. An agonized howl rang out from within the stone city as the man's spiritual sense was sliced in half, and around 10% of it dissipated into nothingness. Only after Han Li had severely wounded the man's spiritual sense did the woman return to her senses, and she let loose an infuriated cry as she manifested her spiritual sense into a giant hand that was swatted violently toward the translucent blade. However, it was already too late. The giant blade disintegrated into specks of translucent light, following which a massive wave of spiritual sense returned to Han Li's body. Immediately thereafter, his thunderstorm wings appeared on his back amid a loud thunderclap, and with a single flap of his wings, he transformed into an azure and white thread of light that quickly disappeared into the distance. An enraged harumph rang out within the city, and the giant spider projection reappeared with a tall, green-robed woman standing atop its head. The woman had her gaze directed toward the direction that Han Li had just disappeared in with a furious expression, but she didn't immediately give chase. Spatial fluctuations erupted nearby, and a black-robed elderly man with a dark expression appeared beside her. His face was slightly pale, and his eyes were filled with resentment and indignation as he asked, "Should we go after him? He'll get away if we don't give chase right away, Fairy Luo. Let him go for now. His spiritual sense is far superior than ours, so he's most likely quite powerful in other aspects as well. Before we find out his origins, it would be best not to act rashly. After all, he may have companions that are lurking somewhere," the woman replied with a shake of her head. The black-robed man's expression eased slightly as he mused. "You're right. Having said that, hasn't this fragmented realm already been sealed? Where did that man come from? Could it be that he also unintentionally fell into this realm through a spatial rift like I did? This realm has indeed been sealed, but there are still several ways to access it. It's just that all of those methods require luck or the expenditure of a huge price. Otherwise, our Usra spider race wouldn't have been able to reside here so securely," the woman said. "If that man really had unintentionally arrived in this realm, then it wouldn't be an issue, but if he did so intentionally, then there could be some trouble," the black-robed man said with a dark expression. "Let's go back and discuss this matter carefully first," the woman said. "That's a good idea. We'll be more equipped to ascertain that man's intentions once we ask Baizhu when that man's spiritual sense was planted on her, the black-robed man agreed. Thus, the giant spider projection faded, and the two of them also vanished in a flash. Moments later, the green-robed woman and black-robed man sat down on the main seats inside a giant hall at the center of the stone city. There were 3 middle-aged figures standing before them, one of whom was a woman, while the other 2 were men. The auras emanating from their bodies seemed to be no lesser than that of normal Grand Ascension stage beings, and behind them stood 17 or 18 other figures that were giving off spatial tempering stage auras. One of them was none other than the young woman that had drawn Han Li here from the lava lake. One of the 2 middle-aged men extended a salute before asking, "Who was it that had just attacked our city? Were they targeting our Usura spider race?" "That's hard to say for now. Bai Zhu, didn't you sense anything when that man planted his spiritual sense onto your body? Do you recall when he did this?" the green-robed woman asked as she turned to the young woman. Bai Zhu's expression changed drastically upon hearing this, and she hurriedly stepped forward before kneeling and laying her head onto the ground as she replied, "If Senior Yi hadn't pointed it out, I would still be completely oblivious to the spiritual sense mark, and I have no idea when it was planted on me." "You couldn't sense anything at all. Have a good think before you answer. Even if you didn't notice at the time, you should be able to think of something with the benefit of foresight," the green-robed woman harumphed coldly. "Yes, I'll do my best," Bai Zhu replied in a slightly fearful manner before immediately falling into deep thought. Everyone else directed their attention toward her, and after a while her eyes abruptly lit up. "Did you finally think of something?" the green-robed woman asked as her expression eased slightly. "Yes, I did. I recalled that I felt a very minor sense of discomfort as I was emerging from the celestial flame pond where the space fish beings are residing. However, the feeling was completely negligible, and if I hadn't thought back carefully, I wouldn't have recalled it at all," Bai Zhu replied. "What? The spiritual sense mark was planted at the celestial flame pond?" Both the green-robed woman and black-robed man's expressions changed drastically upon hearing this, as if this were a taboo topic. Everyone else exchanged a few puzzled glances upon seeing this, and the woman among the trio of middle-aged figures hesitated momentarily before asking, "Is it an issue that Bai Zhu was tracked from the territory of the space fish beings? Those beings are merely good live prey for us, are they not? Surely there's no need to be so alarmed." "HMPH, you don't know anything. If those space fish beings really were nothing more than food, then why would we allow them to live in the precious celestial flame pond? In terms of flavor and reproductive ability, there are several other types of beings that would make better live prey," the green-robed woman harumphed in response. The middle-aged woman was still rather confused, but she didn't dare to ask any further questions at the sight of the green-robed woman's dark expression. At this moment, the black-robed man suddenly said with tightly furrowed brows, "Seeing as this matter concerns the space fish beings, I believe it's necessary for us to take some safety precautions, Fairy Luo." "I'm well aware of that. Bai Zhu, give us a detailed recount of everything that happened in the celestial flame pond," the green-robed woman instructed in a cold voice. Bai Zhu's heart jolted upon hearing this, and she immediately did as she was told. "Yes, at the time it was right around noon when I arrived at the celestial flame pond." After hearing Bai Zhu's recount, the green-robed woman and black-robed man exchanged a glance, and they could see their own concern mirrored in one another's eyes. "You can all go now. I have something I wish to discuss alone with fellow Taoist Yi," the green-robed woman instructed. "As you wish." No one dared to offer any objections, and they quickly left the hall, leaving only the green-robed woman and black-robed man in the room. The green-robed woman was silent for a while before asking, "What do you think about this, fellow Taoist Yi? Could it be that that man is pursuing the same thing as us? Otherwise, the precious resources in the small Usura realm alone wouldn't be enough to attract such a powerful being." "I doubt it. That thing is something that we only figured out from a moment of inspiration after pondering the matter for many years. How could someone else be aware of it? I think it's a coincidence," the elderly man replied with a calm expression. "I was thinking the same thing. However, that doesn't mean that that man isn't here to target our Usura spider race. After all, Usura spiders are extremely sought after for beings from other realms," the green-robed woman replied in a cautious manner. "That is indeed a possibility. However, if he really is here to come after your Usura spider race, then he definitely isn't alone. He should have a few allies," the black-robed man said. "That's a good point, fellow Taoist Yi. It's quite difficult to ascertain that man's intentions with the limited information that we have, but if we can find out whether he has allies in this realm, we'll be able to roughly guess his intentions. The green-robed woman then flipped a hand over to produce a formation plate before speaking into it. Summon Wu Ying and Wan Feng to come and see me. Shortly thereafter, a gust of fierce wind and a ball of yellow light swept into the hall and arrived before the green-robed woman and black-robed man. Chapter 2282, Xuan Wu True Blood. This was a pair of young men with vastly contrasting appearances. One of them was a silver-armored man with a head of white hair and a set of handsome facial features, while the other was a very thin and short yellow-robed man with a less than pleasant appearance. Both of them were giving off mid-body integration stage auras, and they immediately extended respectful salutes toward the pair in the hall. The silver-armored man asked, "Do you have some instructions for us, seniors?" "No need for formalities. I'm sure you two have heard about what's just happened outside the city, right?" the green-robed woman asked. The silver-armored man's heart stirred slightly upon hearing this, and he replied in a cautious manner, "We have, but all we know is that we were attacked by a being who seems to be very powerful. Brother Yi and I have some ideas about what that man's intentions may be, but we require confirmation, so we need you two to do some investigating," the green-robed woman said. The pair of young men had already guessed that such a task was waiting for them, but their expressions still changed slightly upon hearing this. Letter 1D4BB, letter 1D45F, letter 212F, letter 212F, letter 1D464, letter 1D452, letter 1D44F, letter 1D4B8, letter 1D45C, letter 1D62E. The silver-armored man was feeling very uneasy, but he could only muster up some courage before replying, That man's powers are clearly far beyond ours. I'm afraid that if we were to undertake this task, it would inevitably end in failure and pose a further hindrance to the two of you." The green-robed woman's expression darkened slightly, and a hint of impatience crept into her voice as she said, "HMPH, so you two are scared. Rest assured, I'm not asking you to go after that man. What I want is for you to use your concealment abilities to see if there are any other unfamiliar people in the small Usra realm aside from that man. With your powers, that should be easily achievable, right?" The yellow-robed man was also quite uneasy, but he was greatly relieved to hear this. "I see. In that case, there are no issues. We'll set off right away." The silver-armored young man was still rather hesitant, but he also agreed in the end. The green-robed woman gave a pleased nod, then said, "All right, you can go now. This realm isn't very big, so it shouldn't take you more than a few days to ascertain exactly how many outsiders have arrived here." "We'll do our best, seniors," the two young men answered in unison, then departed from the hall. As soon as they emerged outside, both of them turned to one another with wry smiles on their faces. "Let's go then. We've already accepted the task, so we'll have to split up and complete it to the best of our abilities. If that man does have companions, then they're most likely quite powerful as well, so make sure to be careful, Brother Wan," the silver-armored man said as he cupped his fist in a parting salute. "Thank you for the words of concern, Brother Wu Ying. I can summon tens of thousands of clones, so even if I encounter a grand ascension stage being, there's a good chance I'll be able to escape. In contrast, your concealment ability is extremely profound, but you could be in some danger if you encounter someone with an ability that just so happens to suppress yours," the yellow-robed man replied with a salute as well. The silver-armored man merely nodded with a smile before energy fluctuations erupted around his body, and he rose up into the air as a gust of fierce wind. As for the yellow-robed man, his body abruptly scattered into specks of yellow light, and within each speck of light was a huge thumb-sized yellow hornet. The entire hornet swarm was led by the largest hornet among their ranks, and they quickly flew away into the distant sky as well. Meanwhile, the green-robed woman and black-robed man were discussing something else in the hall. "As a safety precaution, I still think it's necessary for us to bring the space fish beings into the city. If we can do that, we won't have to worry about any mishaps arising," the black-robed man said in a cautious manner. "If it were that easy to control them, then I would have done so long ago. Unfortunately, the space fish beings can only reside long-term in a place with celestial flames. On top of that, all of those space fish beings have sworn blood vows in the past, so if we try to abduct them by force, they'd sooner activate their bloodline power to commit suicide than comply with us," the green-robed woman replied. "That's quite troublesome, but I've recently mastered a new ability that can resolve this issue, albeit at some costs," the black-robed man said with furrowed brows. The green-robed woman's expression changed slightly upon hearing. "Oh, what costs are you referring to, fellow Taoist? I'm referring to some members of the space fish race, of course," the elderly man replied. "That won't do. There are very few space fish beings to begin with, and it's taken me a massive amount of effort to increase their population to this point. If we sacrifice some of their numbers, when will we ever be able to complete our plan? Besides, there's barely anyone who knows the secret of the spacefish race aside from us, so they shouldn't attract much attention. If we were to try and bring them to the city, it would actually make things worse, as that would alert others to the fact that these space fish beings are very important to us." The green-robed woman refused. "That's true. If I hadn't unintentionally fallen into this realm and discovered the existence of the space fish race and your Usra spider race, I would have never imagined that the ancient secret I had learned would be useful someday. Seeing as you're unwilling to take the risk, then so be it. Having said that, as a safety precaution, we should still send some people to keep an eye on the celestial flame pond. If something were to go wrong, we would still have to step in," the black-robed man said. "I had intended to do the same thing, fellow Taoist," the green-robed woman agreed on this occasion. After that, the two of them began to discuss which people to send to the celestial flame pond. Meanwhile, Han Li had already flown out of the mountain rage with his thunderstorm wings. A rumbling thunderclap rang out, and Han Li reappeared tens of thousands of kilometers away from the mountain range. He took a glance back in the direction of the mountain range, and after releasing his enormous spiritual sense through the area to ensure that he wasn't being followed, a cold smile appeared on his face. He had already predicted that the people in the city would be reluctant to pursue him after witnessing just how powerful his spiritual sense was. Through that earlier clash, he had ascertained the location of the Usra spider lair and the approximate power level of the Usra spiders, as well as greatly restricted the Usra spiders. After all, with such a formidable foe outside the city, the Usra spiders definitely wouldn't dare to leave their lair in fear of Han Li infiltrating the city in their absence. Having said that, there was nothing for Han Li to be concerned about even if they really had decided to pursue him. Even in a one-on-two situation, Han Li was quite confident that he would be able to defeat his opponents. Furthermore, prior to leaving the mountain range, he had set up certain measures that would immediately alert him if the Usra spiders were to leave their lair. Seeing as they hadn't decided to chase after him, this would be a surveillance measure to ensure that the Usra spiders didn't move out of their lair or go into hiding. Looking back, the Usra spiders had been more powerful than he had anticipated. It would still be very risky for him to take on the entire Usra spider race on his own, so he was planning to reunite with Mojangli and the others first. Once the four of them joined forces, they should be powerful enough to contend with the Usra spider race. With that in mind, Han Li didn't linger here any longer and sped toward another direction. 2 days later, Han Li was hovering high up in the air above a lake, watching a giant turtle and a two-headed black python clashing violently in the water down below. The massive turtle resembled a small island with moss all over its shell, while the python was around 1,000 feet in length with hard black scales all over its body. There was a golden plant floating on the surface of the lake not far away from the two of them, and half of the plant was submerged, while the top half was out in the open, bearing 3 red fruits that were giving off a rich fragrance. There were around 30 to 40 fish beast carcasses of different sizes floating in the water around the golden plant, and the pungent beast blood had stained a large section of the lake red. The turtle and the two-headed python were the only 2 beasts that remained in this area. Han Li wasn't paying any attention to the golden plant and the 3 red fruits that it bore. Instead, he was appraising the pair of beasts down below with an intrigued expression. The giant turtle had been tightly bound by the two-headed python, but a layer of blue runes suddenly erupted out of its body, and a rare smile appeared on Han Li's face as he murmured to himself. As expected, this beast really does possess a hint of the true spirit Xuan Wu's bloodline. Looks like I'll be making further progress with my 12 awakening transformations. After that, Han Li didn't hesitate any longer, sweeping a sleeve downward to release a streak of azure light that reached the 2 beasts down below in a flash. The streak of azure light revolved around the two-headed python, and its body was instantly sliced into 7 or 8 segments. The turtle was horrified upon seeing this, and it immediately attempted to flee into the lake, but the streak of azure light also plunged into the lake lightning. In the next instant, Han Li raised a hand in a nonchalant manner, and the water in the lake parted as the giant turtle emerged with an azure chain binding its body. Chapter 2283, Chi-Kizzy. Han Li then pointed a finger downward, and the azure chain immediately transformed into a thin thread before abruptly tightening, and the giant turtle was dismembered into countless chunks. Right at this moment, spatial fluctuations erupted from the surface of the lake, and a translucent white bowl emerged before instantly swelling to around an acre in size. The dismembered carcass of the giant turtle fell into the bowl with unerring accuracy, following which the bowl was drawn back to Han Li by a wave of his hand. During its flight, it returned to its original size, and in the blink of an eye, it had returned to Han Li's grasp. He swept his spiritual sense into the bowl in an unhurried manner before a pleased look appeared on his face. The Xuanwu bloodline within this massive turtle wasn't all that pure, but it would suffice for the cultivation of his 12 awakening transformations. With that in mind, he flipped his hand over to stow the bowl into his storage bracelet, then cast his gaze toward the golden spirit plant before drawing it into his own grasp as well. The plant wasn't going to be very useful to him, but it was clearly extremely precious to some beasts. Otherwise, it wouldn't have attracted so many powerful beasts and caused such a fierce battle. If he could find someone who needed this plant, it could be used as a decent exchange token. After that, Han Li released a burst of silver flames to incinerate all of the beast carcasses on the surface of the lake into ashes, then prepared to depart. However, right at this moment, a burst of faint buzzing rang out from his body, and he faltered slightly before a smile appeared on his face. He flipped a hand over to produce an egg-sized white crystal ball that had bursts of light surging over its surface, as well as specks of light that were around the size of grains of rice flashing incessantly within it. Han Li stared into the crystal ball for a moment before flying away as a streak of azure light in a completely different direction from before. Meanwhile, a streak of bright white light was flying through the air at an incredible speed, above a barren plain millions of kilometers away from Han Li. Close to 10 kilometers behind the streak of white light was a massive sea of turquoise mist that encompassed virtually the entirety of heaven and earth and was releasing a deafening rumbling sound. Furthermore, it wasn't any slower than the streak of white light. In fact, it was a sliver faster, if anything. The two flew over a distance of thousands of kilometers in the blink of an eye, and it didn't take long for the distance between the two of them to be closed down to within 5 kilometers. A burst of sinister cackling rang out within the sea of mist, following which the front section of the mist suddenly transformed into a giant green scorpion projection and a massive blue toad projection. The scorpion projection raised its huge stinger before releasing a pillar of dark green light, while the giant blue toad opened its mouth, and all of a sudden, the space within a radius of several kilometers abruptly congealed as the result of some type of mysterious restrictive force, and the streak of white light involuntarily decelerated. As such, the pillar of dark green light reached the streak of white light in a flash, and just as the two were about to clash, a flurry of countless 5-colored runes suddenly emerged from within the white light. A burst of violent tremors erupted, and the streak of white light was able to struggle free from the restrictive force. A crimson bolt of lightning then sprang out of the white light to strike the pillar of green light, and even though the bolt of lightning appeared entirely unremarkable, it was able to instantly dispel the pillar of green light. At the same time, a burst of urgent chanting rang out from within the streak of white light, and it abruptly vanished on the spot, only to reappear close to 10 kilometers away in the next instant. Situated within the white light was none other than Mo Giantly, and he was holding a small white flag in one hand and a dark red hammer in the other. There were strands of green chi binding around half of his body, while the other of his body was covered in a layer of peculiar blue ice. He wore a grim expression as he cast a glance toward the sea of mist, then immediately continued onward without any hesitation. Immediately thereafter, the scorpion and toad projections vanished in a flash, and the sea of mist continued to give chase. Thus, the process repeated itself. Whenever the sea of mist got too close, Mo Giantly would be forced to use the 2 treasures he was holding to dispel the oncoming attacks, then open up some distance again. This chase had already gone on for a day and a night, and even with Mo Giantly's Grand Ascension Stage cultivation base, he had expended close to half of his magic power. If he hadn't been notified earlier by the treasure that he was carrying that Han Li was nearby, he would have most likely already considered unleashing some type of self-harming secret technique to save himself. Thankfully, a distance of a few million kilometers wasn't very far for beings of their caliber, and right after Mo Giantly used his treasures to dispel another wave of attacks, a streak of azure light suddenly appeared in the distance up ahead. Mo Giantly was ecstatic to see this, and as opposed to using his teleportation ability again, he threw his white flag up into the air, releasing a series of white halos that formed a thick light barrier around him. At the same time, he lashed out viciously toward the sea of mist with his red hammer. With Han Li coming to assist him, he was naturally going to teach his pursuer a good lesson. An earth-shattering boom rang out, and the thick blanket of dark clouds in the sky was abruptly forced apart as a bolt of red lightning that was several thousand feet in length came crashing down upon the giant toad projection. The projection was dispelled in a flash, and strangely enough, the giant scorpion projection also let loose an agonized hissing sound as its body disintegrated into mist as well. After that, the sea of mist began to converge toward the center, and moments later, the mist completely faded to reveal a monstrous creature with a pair of crimson eyes. The creature had the body of a scorpion but the head of a toad, and it was over 100 feet in length. It also had a pair of giant wings that seemed to be caught somewhere between illusion and reality, and there were countless human faces writhing on those wings. Letter 1D6ATF, letter 1D5FF, letter 1D5F2, letter 1D41, letter 1D6A0, letter 1D556. Letter 1D6AC, letter 1D5FC, letter 1D5FA. A cold light flashed through the creature's eyes, and it let loose a string of loud croaks, while a burst of sinister cackling rang out from its wings. As soon as this sound entered Mo Giantly's ears, his spiritual sense was struck by a sense of intense drowsiness. His heart immediately jolted, and he knew that he was in a very perilous situation, but his entire body was so sluggish that he was unable to muster up any spiritual sense to resist. To think that even after being pursued by this creature for so long, it still had such a dangerous spiritual sense secret technique up its sleeve. Right at this moment, the giant creature flapped its wings, unleashing a pair of giant blades that were several tens of feet in length each, both of which slashed directly toward Mo Giantly. The blades seemed to be moving quite slowly, but they reached Mo Giantly in the blink of an eye before infiltrating into his protective light barrier without any inhibition. Mo Giantly was truly alarmed to see this, and he was just about to adopt desperate measures to save himself when spatial fluctuations suddenly erupted behind him, and an intrigued voice rang out. "What is this thing? It's quite an interesting creature." As soon as the voice trailed off, countless arcs of golden lightning sprang forth amid a rumbling thunderclap before striking the two giant blades with devastating force. And Li could tell that Mo Giantly was in great peril, so he immediately teleported over to Mo Giantly before unleashing his divine Devilbane lightning to oppose the oncoming attack. As soon as the golden lightning came into contact with massive blades, the latter immediately disintegrated into mist again, as if they had encountered the bane of their existence. In the next instant, turquoise mist surged behind the monstrous creature, following which its wings reappeared, but they were noticeably smaller than before. The creature's pupils contracted, and a hint of fear appeared in its eye as it cast its gaze toward Han Li. Meanwhile, Han Li gently patted Mo Giantly's shoulder, and a burst of refreshing coolness immediately surged through the latter's entire body. As a result, Mo Giantly's sluggishness was instantly alleviated, and he regained control over his own spiritual sense. "Thank you, Brother Han. This Chi Kizi was a vastly renowned creature even in the ancient Usra. Even if a grand ascension cultivator were to be trapped in its poisonous mist, they would quickly be reduced to nothingness," Mo Giantly hurriedly cautioned. Han Li was enlightened upon hearing this, and as opposed to being fearful, the intrigue in his eyes only grew more pronounced. "So this is a Chi Kizi. I was wondering why you didn't dare to face it head-on. Speaking of which, I don't recall any tomes that state that this creature is adept in captivation secret techniques." He instantly arrived in front of Mo Giantly in a flash, and began to carefully inspect this Chi Kizi. "I don't know why that is, either. There are very little records regarding these creatures, so perhaps it was merely an oversight. If it weren't because of this, I wouldn't have been placed in such a perilous situation," Mo Giantly said with a wry smile as he pulled out a vial and took some magic power regenerative pills. Chapter 2284, Joining Forces. This type of captivation technique is very potent, but it's not a cause for concern if one is aware of it in advance. Having said that, I've heard that Chi Kizis are one of the vastly renowned 10 great beasts of the ancient Usra realm, and it's said that they're born from the sinful energy of countless living beings and possess several extremely troublesome innate abilities. I didn't think that I would encounter such a beast here, Han Li mused. Be careful, fellow Taoist Han. This beast doesn't possess a substantial body, and most of its abilities seem to stem from its wings. I engaged in several clashes against it earlier, and its abilities are all indeed quite troublesome to face. However, it seems that your divine Devilbane lightning has a suppressive effect on it, Mo Jianli said. I've also noticed that it seems to be rather fearful of divine Devilbane lightning, Han Li said with a faint smile before making a grabbing motion, and an azure longsword was manifested in his grasp amid a flash of azure light. He slashed the sword through the air, and a giant sword projection that was over 1,000 feet in length appeared above the Chi-Kizi in a flash. Countless arcs of golden lightning then erupted over the surface of the sword projection before it came crashing down with devastating force. The Chi-Kizi let loose a wary hissing sound at the sight of the descending sword projection, and it immediately flapped its wings, upon which its entire body exploded, disintegrated into a burst of turquoise mist, which plunged straight into the ground down below at an incredible speed, disappearing in the blink of an eye. Han Li faltered slightly upon seeing this before the giant sword projection sped up severalfold in its descent at his behest, and it also struck the area that the mist had just vanished into at an astounding speed. An earth-shattering boom rang out, and a massive trench that was over 10,000 feet in length was created. The trench was unfathomably deep, and the ground near it was entirely charred black, but the Chi-Kizi was nowhere to be seen. That's some impressive decisiveness and speed, Han Li murmured to himself, and he thought about it for a moment but decided against giving chase in the end. Chi-Kizis were indeed vastly renowned, but they served no purpose for him, so there was no need for him to pursue it. Chi-Kizis are quite intelligent as well. It must have immediately fled as it knew that it was no match for you, Mo Jianli said as a relieved smile appeared on his face. It is indeed quite a cunning creature. How did you end up being chased by such a thing, brother Mo? Han Li asked. This was actually quite an unfortunate accident. I was searching for Usra spiders, but unintentionally ventured into the lair of another type of spider, and there was a Chi-Kizi lurking beneath the lair, Mo Jianli explained as an awkward look appeared on his face. It was extremely rare for Grand Ascension stage beings to be chased in such a sorry manner, so this was quite embarrassing for him. I see. Considering there are even Chi-Kizis in this realm, this most likely really is a fragment of the ancient Usra realm, Han Li mused, and he wasn't very surprised by this conclusion. I agree. I've seen many things thus far that should be unique to the Usra realm, but I still haven't seen a single Usra spider. We can only stay in this realm for around half a month, and close to half of that time has already elapsed. Have you discovered anything, fellow Taoist Han? Mo Jianli's brows furrowed slightly as he spoke. Rest assured, brother Mo, I've already tracked down the lair of the Usra spiders, Han Li said with a smile. Mo Jianli faltered slightly upon hearing this before an ecstatic look appeared on his face. Is that true? I wouldn't lie about something like this, Han Li replied with a smile. Letter 1D453, letter 1D633, letter 1D452, letter 1D452, letter 1D4CC, letter 1D626, letter 1D624, letter 1D45C, letter 1D45A. A thought then suddenly occurred to Mo Jianli, and he asked with a hint of anticipation in his eyes, with your abilities, could it be that you've already slain the Usra spider and obtained a thread of time? I'm afraid not, Han Li replied with a shake of his head. Oh, why is that? Mo Jianli was rather taken aback to hear this. I wasn't powerful enough to hunt down the Usra spiders on my own, Han Li sighed. Even you aren't able to handle the Usra spiders. Are there a lot of mature Usra spiders in that lair? Mo Jianli asked with a surprised expression. I'm not sure how many mature Usra spiders are in there, but I did discover an Usra spider that was no less powerful than a true spirit being, Han Li replied. Mo Jianli's expression changed drastically upon hearing this. Han Li continued, in addition to that, there was another Grand Ascension stage being that was no less powerful than the aforementioned Usra spider, and I discovered at least 3 mature Usra spiders. Hence, after a brief clash, I immediately retreated. If we want to take down all of the Usra spiders, then the 4 of us will need to join forces. Also, these Usra spiders have recruited many powerful beasts near their lair, most of which are at the deity transformation stage and spatial tempering stage, but there are some body integration stage beings among them as well. That does indeed sound like something that we won't be able to take on our own, Looks like we'll have to take some risks, Mojangli said as his expression darkened slightly. This is why it's necessary for us to join forces if we want to obtain threads of time. Did you happen to encounter Zhu Ran and Hai Lin on your way here? Han Li asked. I haven't met them, but as I was passing through a forest, I discovered a trail that they left behind, and judging from that trail, they should be heading toward this direction as well, Mojangli replied. In that case, they shouldn't be far away from here. What we need to do now is track them down as quickly as possible, Han Li replied with a contemplative nod. All right, let's get into contact with them and discuss a collaboration, Mojangli agreed without any hesitation. Thus, after a brief discussion, the two of them flew away in different directions. Over half a day later, Han Li and Mojangli were both seated on a giant azure stone. Zhu Ran and Hai Lin were also seated nearby, across from the two of them. Following their separation, Mojangli had encountered Zhu Ran and Hai Lin after searching for only a few hours, and he was naturally ecstatic. He immediately disclosed the situation to Zhu Ran and Hai Lin, then sent a message to Han Li. In the end, the four of them met up in this rather secluded mountain range. A short while ago, Han Li had told Zhu Ran and Hai Lin about the powerful Usra spiders he had encountered, as well as his plan for a collaboration. Zhu Ran stroked his chin with his brows tightly furrowed and said, "If those Usra spiders really are as powerful as you proclaim, then we may not be able to gain the upper hand even if we join forces. Hai Lin and myself will only be able to keep the most powerful Usra spider, or that foreign grand ascension stage being occupied. Will you and fellow Taoist Mo be able to take on the rest?" Instead of offering an immediate response, Han Li turned to Mojangli with a smile and asked, "What do you think, brother Mo? I wouldn't be able to take on the most powerful Usra spider, or that foreign grand ascension stage being, but I should be able to stall those 3 mature Usra spiders for some time," Mojangli replied after a brief moment of contemplation. "In that case, does fellow Taoist Han intend to face one of the 2 most powerful grand ascension stage beings on his own?" Hai Lin asked as he glanced at Han Li out of the corner of his eyes, clearly not very confident in Han Li's abilities. "That's exactly what I intend to do. Which of those 2 are you planning to take on?" Han Li asked. Zhu Ran and Hai Lin were rather taken aback by this response, and only after exchanging a slightly bewildered glance did Zhu Ran reply, "I can see that you're very confident. In that case, the 2 of us will do our best as well. Judging from your description, that female Usra spider seems to be the most powerful of the bunch, so we'll take her on. However, let's clarify one thing first. How are we going to split the cores of the Usra spiders if we secure victory here?" "That's simple. The one who kills the Usra spider gets to keep the core," Han Li replied without any hesitation. Mojangli's expression changed slightly upon hearing this, while Zhu Ran and Hai Lin were very pleased by this answer. "You're a straightforward man, fellow Taoist Han. In that case, wouldn't you be at a disadvantage?" "Not necessarily. If I can take care of my opponent before you do, perhaps I'll be able to track down other mature Usra spiders in the lair, and I certainly won't be holding back. Alternatively, perhaps I'll land the killing blow on your opponent if you take too long," Han Li chuckled. "If you really can defeat your opponent faster than we do, then you're entitled to step in. Neither of us will have any complaints," Zhu Ran replied with a confident smile. "In that case, let's rest for half a day and head to the lair tomorrow morning. We don't have much time left, so it would be best to make haste," Han Li suggested with a smile. Zhu Ran and Hai Lin naturally had no objections to this. "Before that, let me take care of this pesky little pest first," Hai Lin suddenly said as he rose to his feet.